Information Systems, or GIS, or GIS, stands or is a technology that is used to create, manage, analyze, and map all types of data. GIS connects data to a map. It integrates the location data, where things are, with all types of descriptive information about the location. It provides a foundation for mapping and analysis that's used in science and just about every industry. It helps users understand patterns, relationships, and geographic context. In Wyoming, we use it in just about everything. A few of the things that you would probably be most familiar with, and we're probably all going to be watching in the next day or so, especially if any of us have to go back to Cheyenne. One of my favorites is YDOT's interactive road conditions map. Utilizes GIS data to show us what specific areas and roads look like and how they've been affected by weather conditions. Other instances that we use it, the LSO uses it in legislative redistricting that we're getting into now. And basically, any time that you've pulled up a map online and it's interactive, you're playing with GIS data and GIS geographic information systems. The phrase only appears a couple times in the Wyoming statute. The one main statute that is involved is Wyoming Statute 922901, which establishes the Department of Enterprise Technology Services. And that department is tasked specifically with enhancing geographic information system coordination among all government users of geographic information systems. They have put together the Office of Geographic Information Office, and they're going to be here today to present all of the work that they've been doing, so I won't go over that with you now, just so you're aware that that's the source of that department from the statute. The other statute that directs specifically a government agency to utilize geographic information systems is Wyoming Statute 91224, which authorizes the governor to supervise all and direct state agencies in collecting and storing and coordinating with one another the scientific data regarding all the lands and mapping and geographic information systems. So I will not belabor the list. It's several pages long, as you can see. You can take a look at that on your own time and see if you're curious about it. There's also, I just wanted to point out that if you're curious and think it's as fun as I think it is, you can go online, and the Geographic Information Office has links to many interactive maps you can play around with. You can get an idea of everything from well monitoring to road conditions, and as we saw earlier this morning, you know, what shape the roads are in is all information that's going to be, you know, come down to geographic information systems. And with that, I will stand for questions.
Great. Any questions on the legal side of things, and especially the white paper that was put together? Tamara, I appreciate you putting that together. Appreciate the direction from Representative Geringer on putting that together as well. Just kind of give you an idea, the reason why we asked for that white paper committee is just to understand how vast this topic really is. And again, when we have the incredible amount of people that we have that can testify on this as experts, range everywhere from family services all the way down to our county GIS as well. So, so I appreciate that, Tamara. Thank you very much. So that takes us to our first one with Department of ETS.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, my name is Jeff Kleins. I'm the Director of ETS and State CIO. With your permission, Mr. Chair, we've been collaborating with Nancy McCann, who is a former policy advisor, and she has some prepared remarks about the history of GIS and GIS governance in the state. So with your permission, I'd like to invite her to give a few prepared remarks.
Please, Ms. McCann.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Co-Chairman and committee members. I am Nancy McCann. Why am I here? Well, I'm here on my own nickel. I'm not a paid lobbyist for this particular topic, but I have been involved with GIS since the early days, and I also say since I was an infant. And so I can actually provide and share a historical perspective of coordinated mapping, data associated with GIS, intermittent policy, and intermittent governance. How I acquired this knowledge has been over a course of 50 years. Yes, I am that old, but I am only going to share the cliff notes of that. There was a state mapping advisory committee that was started out in the late 50s, and that the state mapping advisory committee coordinated mapping efforts throughout the state. And that's when we had paper maps. They were not digital maps. In 1967, the state engineer's office chaired and coordinated the state mapping priorities as directed by the state planning coordinator within the governor's office. In 1985, the state engineer's office used GIS mapping as a decision-making tool for mapping out tribal water rights and state water rights. And why did they do that? Because we had to determine the overlap between the two types of water rights for purposes of cancellation of the overlapping area. GIS was a perfect tool for that. In addition, GIS was also used to assist with the management of interstate water rights issues. Other traditional mapping agencies were also evolving in the GIS arena so that they could also participate in GIS and be able to start sharing that information. There was an ad hoc GIS user group in the mid-1990s and informal GIS steering committee in the late 1990s. Fast forward through the 1990s, the federal government decided that they were going to start coordinating their mapping needs from paper maps to digital maps, and they needed to have a state point of contact in order to be able to do that. So what they did is they created the Office of Management and Budget, created the Federal Geographic Data Committee to coordinate surveying, mapping, and other GIS activities. And they asked the state, where is the state point of contact? And they wanted to be able to open the door in order to do data sharing agreements between the state and the federal government. There was a reorganizational effort to take the State Mapping Advisory Committee and the Ad Hoc Steering Committee and merge those into what we call the WGIAC, the Wyoming Geographic Information Advisory Council. That council was created by executive order in 1994. That was under Governor Sullivan. Notice was sent out to all state agencies, county clerks, other county entities, and the federal government so that they could appoint individuals to participate in the WGIAC. So it would be a statewide coordinated effort. The members worked hard over the next couple of years establishing bylaws, standards. They had regular meetings, they had minutes, they developed GIS policy and an implementation plan. A survey of all GIS activities was assembled and put into an executive summary, and that summary was given to the governor at that particular time. What we did next is how are we going to staff GIS activities? We needed to have an Office of GIS. There was a one-time effort to fund an Office of GIS for $125,000. And that funded it for a period of time in order to be able to bring people together, coordinate legislative demos. And I brought a little flyer that in 1996, the GIS groups put together a legislative demo for the legislators and to show how partnerships could be developed between different levels of government, be it state, county, and federal government. So we did our best to try to do that. And I think I might have mentioned the bylaws, regular meetings policy. Okay, so because the federal government wanted to have the single point of contact, the WGIAC, the governor on behalf of WGIAC sent a letter to the Federal Geographic Data Committee, which is at the national level, to become a partner of the FGDC. That was approved in 1996, and right after that, we were able to become a partner with the federal government, being able to be recognized, and many other states were also going through that process. Right after that, we started to work with the BLM, and the BLM wanted to share data with us. That was the first big deal that I could recall, because the BLM had given $2.3 million worth of data. Because the goal is, if somebody's already created the data, why does the state need to do it? Let's save money. Why have a duplication of effort? And the motto through GIS time has always been, if you create the data once, you can use it many times. So might as well try to save money. So when that data was given to the state, what ended up happening, that data was then in turn shared back to local governments so that they could start using that data as well. Then what happens next? Well, in 1996, no, I'm sorry, in 2000, there was the online government. It was the e-commerce process where government never had a way of doing business until that time. And I have a newspaper article that shows the state leads the pack on the web. Well, that's doing business online. How does that play into this? Because then you could start having mapping online and start sharing data and downloading maps and making that available. Unfortunately, during this period of time, the Office of GIS funding had expired, and there was an effort to adjust the leadership of WGIAC and reorganize so that you would have an executive committee to try to coordinate. Well, parallel to that, there was still an ongoing statewide project for aerial photography, and it took a couple years to get it done. Governor Geringer was the one at the time, and the state actually did coordinating efforts between state government, federal government, and local governments, and they pooled their resources because no way could you ever kick off a statewide program without trying to pool resources. That's the goal of GIS. And so we ended up with the state aerial photography program, and that was in, again, newspaper before it was online. Fast forward to 2006, there was a reorganization effort to restructure GIS governance, and that resulted in the dismantling of the Wyoming Geographic Information Council and rename it. And it followed the model of, and when they renamed it, they modeled it after the DOT GIS governance structure. But there still was no Office of GIS. There was still a GIS user community that wanted to be able to use and share information and needed to have guidance and leadership. A few years went by, 2013, there was a cooperative agreement that was set up between ETS and the WGIS for a GIS clearinghouse. In 2017, we had GIS governance that changed again, and it was rerouted to the state CIO. But yet, the GIS users are still trying to, paddle along and doing their data. Then in 2022, a GIS charter was advanced by ETS, and the legislation, there was some legislation that was already noted from before. And so now today, in 2026, we arrive here today before you as a committee to talk about GIS governance. It has been 32 years since the first executive order. Do executive orders work? There's been at least a couple on GIS. And so far, they go by the wayside. Do we need something more? I believe we do. There are many views of what GIS governance should be, but over time, as you well know, there's different legislative priorities, different agency priorities, reorganization affecting the structure of GIS governance, changes in administration. We're going through election time, changes in agency directors, hope not, and now possible changes with the committee structure of the folks sitting at the table today. What I ask for you now, what I ask is, if not now, when can we have legislative policy? The GIS community, it has been a wagon with no wheels and no driver for a while, and it continues wanting and needing that leadership. I say that Green Book governance is the rule of law, and I hope that we do get there. And hopefully that will help save money over time, streamline the possibilities of future data sharing agreements, and have more coordination between all levels of government, including the tribal government. And also now the private sector. Private sector has been using GIS in parallel to us, but why duplicate the effort? If they have data we can use and vice versa, why not do that? I stand for any questions, and hopefully I didn't overwhelm you with this information. So.
Thank you, Ms. McCann. Committee, any questions for Ms. McCann on the, I'll just say, incredible history of GIS? Representative Geringer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Nancy, for the presentation. I guess from your experience and seeing the lack of specific governance over time, what do you identify as some of those needs right now?
Ms. McCann.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Geringer, I see the needs that we need a cohesive leadership. And there's been fragmented leadership, but the only way to pull it together is if you're directed to do that. And that's why I say Green Book governance. And without that, we can continue on. Everybody has their charge, but it's fragmented. It needs to be brought together under a cohesive way. And hopefully, no matter what you call it, whether it's why WGAC, WGAC, WYSIWYG, we've had so many acronyms of what you call GIS governance and user community. We got to be able to pull it together.
Okay. Anything further for Ms. McCann? Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for that, Ms. McCann. So what states have a model that you think is working? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. McCann.
Mr. Chairman and Senator Barlow, there are a lot of states out there that are so far ahead of the curve than we have been. There is a group called the National States Geographic Information Advisory Council, and I was a board member back in the day, and that group still continues today. They have evaluated all states so far as their GIS governance, and there are the top leaders, and they have given grades, and Wyoming has been at the bottom of those grades. And so I would propose that governance be evaluated and look and see what is the best fit for Wyoming, because we would want Wyoming to do it the Wyoming way. I mean, there may be pieces of other states, but we want the Wyoming way.
Anything further? Seeing none, thank you, Ms. McCann. Appreciate it. Mr. Kleins, anything further?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, just a few minutes. And just by the way, I also have with me Heidi Martin, the statewide GIS coordinator, and Erica Legursky, the deputy CIO, that I can call on if I need to call in help from the answer questions I can. So I see this as a critical opportunity for Wyoming. Our current state of GIS data management is what I would describe as an unrealized potential. We have incredible data, but there is a siloed aspect to it. Our vision is to move from these isolated silos to a formalized governance model. It isn't about building a new empire. It's about establishing standards and policies to ensure that our geospatial investments are transparent, efficient, and scalable across all levels of government. Since the systems are also funded by taxpayers, the public should have access to the data that's collected and used as well. We should make the most of those precious taxpayer dollars by looking for those economies of scale, to look for savings in license management and infrastructure management and things like that on the back end. And that's one of the key areas that I think a governance will be able to do, is allow us to look for those efficiencies there. And as mentioned, ETS does have a role in this, and some might ask, well, why? And so it is, as was articulated earlier, that statutory responsibility that we have to look for coordination among all governmental users. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. But as a centralized agency, a centralized service agency, I see the ETS's role and responsibility in looking for those opportunities to streamline, enhance, and improve those technology systems. We did present a PowerPoint or a slide deck. I'll just reference it. There's this list of 2 slides in there that show all current agencies and a little brief description of their GIS usage. You can see there's a substantial number of state agencies that leverage GIS to add value to what they do for the citizens of the state. You can tell that it has grown substantially over the past few decades, and it continues to grow. We have other agencies that have expressed a desire to be into the GIS environment, but they lack the funding and technical resources to be able to do that. A governance model where we have shared resources and things like that would lower the bar for those agencies to leverage GIS data in delivering their services to the agencies or to the citizens as well. The impact of functionality of GIS system goes far beyond state level agencies. As it referenced earlier, we have that implied direction to do coordination among all governmental users. We also have in the slide deck a slide that lists several federal and local agencies that we have the opportunity and pleasure to work with on a regular basis. It is not an inclusive list, but it does give you an idea of how broad GIS is used in all levels of government, both on a federal and a local level. We also have come a little bit to the technical aspect of things. ETS currently maintains what we call the Wyoming Interagency Mapping Enterprise Server, or WIMES. We like our acronyms in technology. Our goal with developing this is a centralized repository of GIS layers, maps, and other resources in a common format that can be used or consumed by those who have a need for it. A key part of managing data is to ensure that there's proper security and control mechanisms in place to ensure the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of those services and that data. The system that we have is currently not used enterprise-wide, but it could be a foundation for an enterprise system. But we need the voice of the users, the agencies, and others to make it a structure that would work for everyone. This is where a model of governance would make the efforts that we are currently making today and allow them to be taken to the next level. As Nancy articulated, we've had a couple of starts and stops with the GIS governance. We had an executive orders in 1994 and again in 2006, and then those were rescinded in 2017. ETS established a new advisory board in 2022, but it is currently inactive due to various levels of participation and things like that. Without a formal mandate in statute, participation is voluntary. Some agencies have been more progressive than others in driving innovation and using new features and functionality faster than others. While this would appear to be a good thing, I think it is a good thing, that leads to differing standards, approaches, technology architecture, and it makes interoperability much more difficult. So yes, we need to drive the innovation, especially in the era of artificial intelligence. And having conversations with Esri, they're driving a lot into their artificial intelligence to make geospatial or geographic information systems that much more useful to the users. But in order for us to take advantage of that leap in technology, we have to have consistent data that can be used across all pillars. I want to illustrate by telling 2 brief stories that illustrate the success of a good governance model and one that maybe not so much. And this comes from a prior experience for me. One was we were looking at consolidating state office buildings in a large city to a one-stop shop. As we got this group together to look at, well, where's the ideal place to build this one-stop shop? What we did is we went to every state agency and got a list of all of their users. And we were able to put that in a GIS map, which would then create a heat map within the city of where people were physically located. We then added layers on top of that with public transit, with parking, with other services around there that would be needed for the people. With all that data and layered together, we were able to give the decision makers a very specific set saying, here's where your customers are. So we could put those services as close to those that needed it as we could. And that was a value add to that group to be able to see where should we be looking. They were able to use that with, the local governments, with the real estate commission, others to find that ideal space. On the flip side, and this one's a fun story from a perspective of it impacts a hunter. But a hunter in another state, I want to be clear, it was another state, was using a public or a map issued by a state that says, here's where publicly available lands are for hunting, and here's how to access them. Well, the GIS layers that they were using for access were several years out of date. And so you can imagine when he was approached by law enforcement for trespassing, that he was embarrassed and frustrated. He's saying, I'm using a state issued map. And while nothing serious came of this, it was embarrassing for the hunter. It was embarrassing for the state for publishing a map that didn't have accurate data. All of that could have been solved by having solid data sharing and enterprise structures in place. So to reiterate what Nancy said, I think we have an opportunity here to take the technology that is widely used around the state and to formalize a structure that would magnify the benefit to those that use it and potentially expand access to those who need it. And then I also say that there should be an element of publishing the data from a public consumption as well, because I know GIS is used by many people at a personal level throughout the state as well. My vision, or our vision, would be an enterprise structure that would allow agencies to remain autonomous, to innovate, to explore, to drive services they give to the citizens, but at the same time have a back-end structure that would drive efficiencies and leverage the licensing and infrastructure spend to drive down costs, to create authoritative sources of data that can be published in a standard format that could be centrally available to others to use as needed. The beauty of the enterprise structure is that it's a program once, used many times. If we have a map, or if I create a map in a GIS structure that pulls data from multiple other sources, as they update their data sources, my map is updated as well. So I add my voice into, I think this is an opportune time, and I would look forward to working with the committee in the next steps, and we'll stand by for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Kleins. Any questions? Yes, Representative Larson.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman and Director Klein, could you slip to page 2 there in your thing where you talked about the collaboration? And you talk about an enterprise agreement with 2 agencies. You've got, five enterprise agreements, then you have 2 interested agencies. And then you have 20 non-enterprise agreement agencies. And so are you saying that the enterprise agreement is these agencies working through you and using your GIS system, and then you bill out on an enterprise model? And if that's the case, then the 20 non-enterprises are running independently, and are they all using different formats? Give me an understanding of what that looks like. Is that matter unorganized, or?
Mr. Chair?
Please.
Yeah, so I think you have a very good understanding of it. So the enterprise license, or the enterprise agreement where we have, is where ETS negotiates with the vendor, and we negotiate licensing and things like that. We have a standard enterprise architecture infrastructure as well. Other agencies do have their own contracts with the vendor, have their own infrastructure and well. And that's where the opportunity for leveraging that spend to drive down costs, I think, is an opportunity for us to use at this point in time.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Follow up,
Is it the same information?
Mr. Chair?
please.
Yeah, so GIS, all the agencies are using the same vendor, different versions, different structures. Some have different layers and maps, and so different standards of how the maps are encoded and published and things like that.
Thank you.
Committee, anything further for ETS? I guess my biggest question, so I've been dabbling in the GIS stuff with counterpart that's sitting back here for better part of 10 years now, just trying to get some of the stuff. What would you say the biggest issue that you face right now? You've mentioned that the governance structure that you have, which would allow everybody, if they wanted to get together, they could. What is the biggest thing that's lacking you guys from all getting together without us having to do Green Book statute to make sure that everybody plays nice in the sandbox?
I think right now we have an amazing group of people that are willing to get together and play nice, but I think we all realize, looking at the past, that that's not always the case. And so looking for this formal Green Book governance is looking to make sure we have that opportunity going forward with changes in leadership, changes in elected officials and things like that, as it may not be a priority for the next director of ETS or the next CIO. We don't want that focus to drop off and be able to do it. So yeah, I think we have the ability to do it now, but I think what we're looking for is a longer term, something that will survive that changes in leadership.
Okay. Representative Geringer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a little follow-up to that too. I think it goes beyond just the collaboration between the departments. It's also about the data, correct? It's not only because there's maybe some standardization issues and having a comprehensive basis for the data, but also the sharing of that data and who controls it, who owns it. The state has produced a whole bunch of data that is not necessarily protected as state-owned data. Is that fair to say?
Mr. Kleins?
Yes, I think that's very fair to say. So yeah, and that's where I talk about that confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And those are three kind of key principles for technology people, that confidentiality is who has access to data, who should have access to the data. At times, there is GIS data that is produced that is confidential, doesn't need to be shared. You have to protect that data. The integrity is it accurate? What are your data ingest points? How are you doing it? And the availability, just want to make sure it's there when it's needed.
Okay. All right. Seeing nothing further, appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Kleins, for being here. Let's go ahead and bring up the Department of Revenue. I saw them chomping at the bit earlier when I said, let's play musical chairs, and Mr. Gill was ready to roll, so. Speaking from somebody who never used this in the assessor's side of the office, right?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ken Gill. I'm the Property Tax Division for the Department of Revenue. And with me is our Director Fanning is here today too. Let me share my screen here. Really, my part of this presentation is just to show you what the Department of Revenue is doing with GIS and what we're providing statewide. So I've asked to share there, Eve.
Maybe if you all peek really close up on the screen, you can see his slideshow on the computer, so.
All right, I think, Mr. Chairman, if okay with you, I'd like to share the statewide parcel viewer, maybe.
I will say my internet has gone to complete junk since we've joined on here, so I'm not sure if you're just experiencing the same type of delay, but I'm hoping that's the case. I happen to have the people that might control that, so I'm wondering if I've upset somebody over there. There we go. We can see up there.
All right, Mr. Chairman, this is the statewide parcel viewer. This data is provided to the Department of Revenue by all the county assessors statewide. So on a yearly basis, we ask the county assessors to send us their shape files, and then we have to do a little manipulation to get it together all in one spot. I will say we're probably one of the only states that actually has a statewide parcel viewer. So there are a few others that have attempted it, but we're the only ones that really have succeeded. Let me zoom in here. So as you can see on our statewide parcel viewer, the the base layer is really the ownership layer from the assessor's office. So we have many layers. I'm going to move the Zoom thing out of my way here. Sorry, Mr. Chairman. Okay, I think I solved that. I muted myself. All right, so in our statewide parcel viewer, the department, as you'll see in the white paper provided by LSO, the department is responsible to map all taxing authorities. So if you can levy a mill, basically it's the department's job to map those on a yearly basis as new ones get formed. We always have new districts get formed on an annual basis, and we map those. They have to be in compliance with the Department of Revenue. And the compliancy would be they formed it through their county commissioners. They have given us a legal description, and they've provided us a map. And then they're in compliance. If they're not in compliance, they are not able to levy a mill. So we would contact those counties with those out of compliant districts or taxing authorities and tell them that they cannot levy for whatever tax year. So I just thought I'd bring up this first authority here. This is kind of interesting. This is in Laramie County. This is all the fire districts. So these are all taxing authorities that are fire districts in Laramie County. And you can see each one of them. You can click in each of these boxes and get some information about each taxing authority. Of course, on our website, if you ever want to see the formation documents, you can actually go to revenue.wyo.gov and you can see the forming documents of all these entities. And we've saved some of those. Some of those are out there since, the 40s, the 50s. So we have all that documentation still saved. Thought I'd zoom in here a little bit and then we'll get down to the parcel layer. As you can see, each of these blue lines is a different parcel property, and you can simply click on these and you'll get an information window. It gives you a little bit of information here. It gives you the state PIN number, what tax year this is from. Then we have the township range and section. Again, township range and section. And one of these, on some of the parcels, if I would have clicked on a parcel that was an actual owner that was taxable, it would have shown up. But for presentation purposes, I purposely picked an exempt parcel. But what you can do now is once you get here, if you want more information on the parcel that you're on, you can click more info and it will take you right to the website of the county assessor. So all from one site that the Department of Revenue is housing there. So real good information out there. Very, very collaborative with our local partners for sure.
Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my county has map server and it's evidently shifting to something else. And I go to Natrona County and it's another beast. But what you're telling me is with this GIS system that you have in the Department of Revenue, I could go on and find the same thing that I'd find on map server. Is that accurate?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, that's semi-accurate. On your map server in Fremont County, for instance, you're going to see identifying pieces of that property. You're going to see the square footage of that house, the value of that house, any outbuildings, the land size, that sort of thing. We don't provide that information here, but you can find the parcel here, then go directly to your mapping parcel for your county. And you're right, they are different from county to county. I think there's about 14 or 15 counties that are with one vendor, and then there's counties with other vendors across the state.
Mr. Thank you.
Follow up.
But probably the more streamlined would be to go to this, find the parcel, click on the county, and if you're searching across different counties, it seems like this would be the faster way because you've got all the information in one place.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, that is correct. It's all in one place. And I will tell you, if it goes down, our phone starts ringing. So And it doesn't go down very often, but if it does go down, our phone does ring. So much like the county, our county partners, if their mapping sites go down, I know their phone rings off the hook because everyone is using their mapping sites, no doubt about it. If there's no more questions on the statewide parcel viewer, I'll move on to the next piece that the department is doing.
Yep, we do have one. Representative Garger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Gill. So when you said that you get the parcel data from the various counties, what happens on those county lines where the information may overlap or, doesn't quite fit? How does that get resolved?
Mr. Chairman, that's our technical service group and way above my head. I don't know exactly how they do it, but they try to map it so that it does flow when a property actually crosses those county lines. So they have to do a little manipulation when they get those files. And as you can imagine, Mr. Chairman, the files that we get from each county, they're a little bit different. So our technical service group actually has to work with those files, massage them, and get them to where they're working in one cohesive pattern.
So, Mr. Chairman, so it's safe to say there's not necessarily it's not a seamless kind of thing right now where you still have to every year you're having to update and coordinate and try to optimize the data to make it fit for your purposes.
Mr. Chairman, I would say you're accurate there. It's not seamless for sure.
And then another follow-up, Chairman. And how about along state boundaries? What happens there when maybe our information I guess the question is there any pushback from, say, property owners that say, hey, I don't have this much land in Wyoming or vice versa. We think it should be in Wyoming or in Colorado or in Utah or that sort of thing. Do you have any issues with state lines?
Mr. Chairman, not to my knowledge, but I'm sure there is. One of the things about this GIS technology and putting this information out there is it lets property owners look at their property, right, and say, okay, I wasn't deeded that 1,000 acres. It was 1,000.50 acres, so that information's out there that they can check that. And that way they can go to their local county officials and make sure that it is drawn right, that they're being assessed for the property that they actually own, whether it be more or less.
And then one final. Thank you for that description. But so then I guess the final thing is when it comes to you have to do this on an annual basis. So this data is constantly being changed, and yet you're working with a static set that's maybe up to a year old. Is that right?
Mr. Chairman, that is exactly right. This gets updated in June typically because the state board certifies values of the county assessors, and that's about when we bring that data in and then present it in the statewide parcel viewer. So yes, it is the day it's uploaded, it's out of date.
Well, that's good news. Mr. Gill, go ahead. Continue, please.
All right, Mr. Chairman, thank you. The next thing I'd like to show you is the eagle view imagery, or what we call oblique imagery. And oblique imagery, it would be similar to a bird's eye view, if you will. This is great technology that's being used nationwide. We contract with Eagle View to fly this imagery of the populous areas of Wyoming. And then there are a few counties out there, a handful, that are actually using our buying power at the Department of Revenue to actually fly their entire county. So of this oblique imagery. Now, this oblique imagery is very unique because you can see all four sides of a building. Right now we're looking at the Hirschler and the Capitol, but I can switch my view and now I'm to that side. Switch it again, back facing the Hirschler, facing the Capitol. So you can change your view. This technology also, it's pretty incredible. If I zoom in here to a building, let's say that I want to measure this building. So I could use the measuring tools that are available. Sorry, my mouse isn't working very well. and measure a distance. So if I wanted to measure this corner, and it's only as good as your mouse is, so, and I'm not very steady with a mouse. So if I wanted to measure that corner of the Hirschler building, it's a lot easier when you have a mouse pad, but anyway, there, I'll stop it there and it will give me that was 20.8 feet on that. So in other words, from a desktop in our application in property tax and appraisal, from a desktop, an assessor or their staff can actually measure the building from their desktop. This technology also identifies changes in property. So if we flew a flight in a certain year and then we flew a flight 2 years later, if there were any changes added, additions or deletions to that property, the change finder would find that and print out a report, allowing the assessor to focus more on those properties that have changed and not focus on the one that they've been to multiple times over multiple years. So it's great technology that we're using. Everyone in the state government has access to this if they would like it. We provide logins. I know some agencies, I'm using their web browser. It's not the easiest thing to use, but there's some agencies that are actually taking this imagery, using some type of API and bringing it into their environment. So it is something that is being used statewide. And then part of our agreement, we can't give it to, a roofing company or an insurance company or something like that. But because we've flown it, they can subscribe to the vendor and actually get access to those. So we had a big hailstorm in Cheyenne last year. The roofing companies used this image so they could measure those roofs and find out exactly the square footage that they needed to replace. And it made estimating easier for our local partners and local businesses. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I would stand for any questions. I will say that the Department of Revenue, we talk about collaboration and getting everyone on the same page. The Department of Revenue has a business plan on the CAMA system. And for over 20 years, we've had one uniform CAMA system across the state of Wyoming that was legislatively prescribed.
Committee, any questions for Mr. Gill and the Department of Revenue? Seeing none. Oh, we do. Senator Gold, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I use this all the time, this tool in Sweetwater. I don't know if it's just a uniqueness to Sweetwater or not, but why wouldn't this data be available to whomever? I mean, if we're going to open it up to the public, I mean, what's the downside of sharing this data? It sounds like there's obstacles in certain places. Could you help me out with understanding that a little bit better? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, I think so. Sharing with private companies, is that the gist of your question? Okay. Yeah, it's part of our agreement that we don't do that. And I think the cost would be higher if we had more users, if you will.
Follow up.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. What's stopping me? I can just go on there. I don't even have to say it's a corporation or anything. It just says, do you agree to these terms? So there's no, tell me if I'm wrong, but it seems like anybody can say and get the data if they wanted. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Gill.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Senator Kolb, you're right. With your Sweetwater County parcel viewer, absolutely. That's all public data. So the imagery, I'm specifically speaking to the imagery that is oblique. So the bird's eye view. The ortho view, it's public. It's public record. So the flat over the top of the roof view is public record. And all of the information in the assessor's office, except for the sales price, is public data, because that data comes from the county clerk.
Okay. Anything further? We got two down here. Let's go to Representative Nicholas first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm curious, what I haven't really heard is rationalization or justification for green books, and how you monitor and how you come up with what's the risks that we're trying to protect. what are the issues that occur that make this necessary? Is it theft? Is it misuse? And if those are the issues, then how are those controlled? And what's the mechanism by which it's controlled? I mean, is it something that the department wants this to be regulated, or are you just here explaining how you use it? So I'm trying to dig down into exactly what we would do and what we would accomplish by regulating it.
Mr. Keel?
Mr. Chairman, I would defer to Director Kleins on that for sure. And, you know, from that standpoint, I'm here really to show what we're providing at this time using GIS. But, you know, coming from a county, I being a former county official, it would be nice to be on the same page statewide. I think to the chairman's point, people do want to play in the sandbox well, right? I think they do. But as things change and administrations change, that sometimes goes by the wayside. It may not be an important thing. So I think having it established and giving us a basis and a basis for everything that we do in GIS, I think would be a good thing. Of course, it takes time. It's not something that we can pass legislation right away and all of a sudden push that easy button. There's going to be a lot of transferring of data to new platforms, et cetera. So it's not something that can happen overnight for sure.
Well, then, just to follow
Follow
up, well, then, you know, we've got multiple companies doing it. So that you want to integrate those all into one basic, similar, attributed data, so they cross-pollinate. Is that one of the purposes, or to make it simpler? Or that's, I
Mr.
still
Keel?
don't quite understand the overall purpose.
Mr. Chairman, I think you're spot on there, but I would leave it to the professionals that really do the behind the scenes data on this. I'm really more of a user for sure.
And then
Follow up?
I'd like to know what we're talking about in terms of cost to effectuate something like this, and existing contracts, and how that might impact users and providers and the private entities involved in such an action, if we can find out.
I would say for Mr. Giel on the Department of Revenue side of things, I think that would probably be more suited. So if we can bring you back up, Mr. Kleins, that's a good question. And then to kind of tap onto the answer that Mr. Giel provided, that's what we're exploring with this. Is we have so many hands and so many people going in so many different directions. One layer to get somebody mapped out for something like that could take hundreds of hours for somebody to actually be pinpointing in and putting that together. And for instance, when I worked at the Department of Environmental Quality, we had tons of different layers for different things. When somebody creates that layer, that becomes their property. And what we're trying to say as a committee here is say, well, if you've got that layer, provide that layer to somebody. Let's everybody be able to grab that layer and be able to use that. Right now, there's no governance for that. There's nothing stating that you need to share this information. We're relying on everybody walking into the sandbox and saying, sure, you can play with my pail and you can play with my sandcastle, right? But sometimes somebody says, no, I bought this sandcastle. I'm not allowing you to use it. And that's what we're running into across the board. That does beg the question, however, that Representative Nicholas is saying is we do have some counties, some agencies, stuff like that, that have current contracts that would be effectuated and would need to be worked through. Can you talk about what this looks like on maybe a cost saving scale as opposed to a cost?
Yeah. So thank you for the question, Representative Nicholas, and I love your comments, Chairman Brown. That was perfect as far as what you're doing. As far as the costs go, the license, it's the economies of scale. If we buy more licenses under one contract, we can drive down the price a little bit. So there'll be a little bit of cost savings from that perspective. Another cost savings could potentially be in infrastructure, where we've got servers stood up in a dozen different places at this point in time. You know, if we look for consolidating those into a centralized type of stuff, there's some potential cost savings there. Overall, that's where your efficiencies and economies of scale are going to come for. As far as the detailed, as far as what that looks like, we haven't dove into that aspect of it at this point in time, preparation for this hearing, but I think that's something that's a valid question that we could do some research on during the interim and come back at a future meeting to give an estimate to the council.
Representative Geringer?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Giel, the aerials that you were, the ortho imagery that you've done, was that paid for by the Department of Revenue?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, yes, it was.
Mr. Chairman?
Follow up?
For one, I know at least Laramie County also pays for aerials to be flown. I'm sure other counties do, other agencies do. And I think to your point about cost savings as well, we're recreating data, going back to what Ms. McCann talked about early on. If we create the data, we ought to be able to use that multiple times and not have to spend money over and over and over again. And also, because there's all these different agencies that are utilizing that data from state to federal to county, there may be some cost sharing kinds of approaches that could be utilized as well.
Don't you agree? Senator Cole?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do agree. What type of money are we talking about? Is there any broad idea about what it would take to unify the state when it comes to a program like this? So we would be the ones that did it? Just some idea. I mean, thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'm going to leave that up to the expert sitting next to me.
Mr. Kleins?
So thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Gold. A lot of the cost is going to be in soft dollar. It's an effort in consolidating and moving stuff over the time to be able to do that. So there wouldn't be a large outlay of capital expenditure to move things. It would be a plan that we could dive into as well to give you a better idea of that. But there's not a large outlay of, oh, we've got to buy this infrastructure or things like that, at least off the top of my head.
Follow up?
Yeah, follow up, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for that answer.
Representative Larson?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. To follow up on that, is there any reluctance within the agencies to consolidate that? Do they feel like they lose something or at risk of losing some?
Mr. Chair. Yes, Representative Larson, I think there is some aspect and concern about the loss of control. And that's where I think a governance committee that is made up of the stakeholders, the agencies, the experts and stuff to say, okay, we want this structure that can drive these efficiencies, but I still want to maintain my independence to be able to innovate and to develop and stuff like that is the key point in making that successful, is to have them at the table to make those decisions.
And I think that's actually what we've been asked for with this is, can we please get somebody to tell us to play together nicely?
Yeah.
Ultimately what I'm hearing.
So I'm curious, this is something that can probably happen, at least on the state side, independently through a directive from the governor's office to begin unification of all of the GIS components. Has that taken place, or has that been approached to the chief executive?
Mr. Kleins?
Mr. Chair, yeah, so there has been a few executive orders. There's one in 1994, an executive order that was then updated in, I think it was 2006, Nancy. Those were then rescinded in 2017. So there's not a current existing executive order that would give us that structure. And given the starts and stops with it over the years, that's why we're exploring this opportunity via the Green Book to say something that will outlast a executive order and give that formal structure.
Follow up?
Well, I don't know if you want to pick the dumbest people in the room to make this work, but that's what you're doing when you turn it over to us. So
I resemble that remark. I think to what you're saying, that's part of the process. And as we were going through the topics for consideration, this particular topic doesn't fit in any single one community and or committee. Maybe the closest aligned would be corporations with political subdivisions, but even at that, that's a very far stretch. We have done a lot of work in this committee on GIS work. I think I've ran at least 3 bills that I can count on myself. So prior to your time coming on the committee, this committee has delved into it, but that was really the rationale of why we're talking about it here is, again, you have all these different committees that kind of have their hands in the same pot. Same thing happens with these guys out here. Same thing that happens where we haven't even reached the county level yet, right? You've got different counties doing different things, and it's a very, very large spider web that is unfortunately not connected to anything at this point. And so we're just trying to connect everything together. So thank you, Mr. Gill. Thank you, Mr. Kleins. Let's go ahead and bring up the University of Wyoming. Oh, we're online with that. Okay. I thought we got to hear you, Mr. Smith. Jeez.
And Mr. Hammerlink is online now.
Hammerlick.
All
Okay.
right.
Mr. Hammerlick, please, the floor is yours, sir. Please introduce yourself and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Are you able to hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Excellent. Joining you from Barcelona, Spain, where I'm actually talking about GIS on an international level. So glad to be able to make the connection. And this is an important enough topic to stay up a little late here. So I'm happy to be here. Just a little bit of background. I direct the Wyoming Geographic Information Science Center at UW, or WIGIS. You might have heard the acronym mentioned before. Along with Nancy, I've been long time engaged in GIS, going back to, I think I was maybe there in the room when when Governor Sullivan signed that executive order. I had hair then, but this topic has been pretty much my whole career, and so yeah, happy to be able to share a few thoughts here. We do have some great resources and great folks in the state, and people that have been able to contribute to conversations nationally and even broader. I'm currently advising the Federal Geographic Data Committee as a member of the National Geospatial Advisory Committee appointed by the Secretary of Interior. So I feel like I have a pretty good handle on what other states are doing and sort of what might work well for us and what might not. Just to echo a little bit about what some others have said, I think that the cornerstone for coordination is really around data and turning that data into useful information, to support better informed and better efficient decision making. In order for that to be possible, that data needs to be credible, and that means the data needs to be accurate and complete and up to date. And that up-to-date piece means that it needs some care and feeding, and that we need to support the various agencies, both at the state level and in our municipalities and counties, to be good data stewards, really, And it can't always just be sort of, this kind of top-down enforcement, if you will. But I think we also have to think about incentives for local government to play in this arena and to contribute. What is in it for them, right? And same for the state agencies, I will say. And along with that goes standards, and we talked about that a little bit already. And Director Kleins mentioned, as we're moving into this era of the influence of AI, those standards are going to become even more important. Because it's not just sort of humans accessing this data, but it's these AI agents, right? And we both want to make that data useful to support commerce, but we also want to protect that data. And so, these are some of the reasons I think that we want to be thinking about this kind of coordination and governance. And what that looks like, I think there's state government coordination, right, among the cabinet level agencies, but there's also that statewide piece, and the cities and counties and tribes need to be at the table, and we need to think about ways that make it worth their while to be there, and there are ways to do that, I think. And there are ways to honor that different counties do things differently, and there can still be coordination and sharing data. To say just a little bit about the university's role in this over the years, we created WIGISC in 1996. We just celebrated our 30th anniversary here a couple of years ago. There was always a question of how big a player UW should be in this space, because a center like ours could come and go, and we've managed the last 3 decades and a lot of governors and executive orders and different efforts to do this. We've maintained a data clearinghouse for the state, a public-facing one, not the internal enterprise one type that Director Kleins was talking about, for almost 30 years, 29 years now, with various levels of funding. To begin with, we did that with federal funding. For a time, we did it with no funding at all. In 2014, I think Ms. McCann mentioned there was some funding that went to support a partnership with UW to create, stand up and support a statewide data clearinghouse or data hub. And we continue to do that, although the funding for that went from a biennial allocation of $500,000 in 2014 and slowly went to about $350,000 in the next biennium and then to something like $100,000 by about year 6. There was a lot that we did with that money, actually, and a big part of it. And as you're starting to think about funding and the kind of infrastructure and support that this takes, a big part of that was we had a dedicated position, not just for the technical side of things, but a person that really coordinated this across the state. That this person pretty much was at every meeting where data coordination happened. Whether it was about early days of broadband, whether it was about coordinating water data, wildlife data, we had that coordinating presence at the table in order to bring that data together and make it discoverable by others and usable by others. Our role has changed a lot over time. We used to host the parcel viewer for the folks in revenue, and then as they built capacity, they were able to take it on themselves, and that's like a success story to me, right? Like before there was capacity, we were able to step in and do that, and then we were able to turn it over to them. When Governor Friedenthal signed the executive order for the sage-grouse core area management for sage-grouse, we built that tool to implement that executive order, and then we're later able to hand that over to Wyoming Game and Fish. We've developed transmission lines for precursor to the Energy Authority. We support the Wyoming Food Network. We support the Wyoming After School Program with a GIS map server. A lot of different things that we've done. Our role is kind of shifted now. We do a lot of sort of maybe higher end things, kind of more advanced technological sorts of things, but we still do serve a lot of data for the state and a lot of imagery. And there was a mention about the ortho imagery and the Eagle View orthographic data. A story there where I think coordination is helpful is that aside from the Eagle View data, that's the kind of bird's eye view data. We also have data collected that would be like a standard aerial photograph, if you will, for the state. And the U.S. Department of Agriculture coordinates that in each state. And where there's good coordination with state government, a lot of times agencies are able to pool resources and kind of do like a value add for a lot of those things and maybe get a little bit more for their dollars than they had originally gotten. We haven't been able to do that very well in our state because we haven't had that sort of coordination mechanism in order to pull that off. I would say the same thing has happened in terms of some of our support for broadband data and understanding that because we just didn't have the coordination, 4 or 5 years ago, when there were a lot of resources available to do that kind of work. We really missed out on a lot of resources that would have been beneficial today for doing things like updating address data sets, as well as things like next gen 911, next generation 911 that is all cell phone based now, right, instead of landlines. So there's a lot of reasons I think for supporting this kind of coordination. And I think the sort of up and down of the funding is a reason to think about it, and doing something with statutes. We've had funding off and on from the state. We've had funding off and on from local government at UW to do some of these things. And I'm not advocating that we should be the ones to do this, but it's representative of this idea that this funding is oftentimes very transient, right? And sometimes the funding you get may not have been the best funding or best use of that funding. And so I think something in statute would really help sort of formalize this, and whether it starts with something as basic as coordinating and supporting that kind of governance model, I think that would be a valuable step forward. I guess the last thing I'll say is that, I think as Ms. McCann said, the best model for us is going to be the Wyoming model. We can look at what a lot of other states do, and that have states that have relationships between state government and universities, states where local government plays a big role. There's a lot of great examples out there, but I think we have our sort of own way that we can do this. We don't need an outside consultant to tell us how to do this. We have some good folks that you've already heard from, and others that I think if given the opportunity to provide a blueprint for what this should look like, we could deliver that to you. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Well, thank you for staying up till 11 o'clock or midnight over there in Barcelona. Appreciate that, Mr. Hammerlink. We do have a couple of questions here. Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jeff, thanks for joining us. I have two questions, if I may. You noted your funding being dropped in 2014 or 2015. I remember those. And I remember there was a lot of cuts back then that didn't get replaced that should have. And so my question as it relates to that, is your budget within the university? And if so, where at in the university? I'm just trying to figure out where we would have seen that. And maybe we could answer that first, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Hammerlink, please.
Yes, Mr. Chair and committee members. Yeah, that funding was provided through, I guess, a contractual basis, if you will. So it was not a part of the university block grant or not an addendum to the block grant. Most of the funding that YGISC has received over the years, we have a small base budget that is a part of the block grant. We moved the GIS Center into our School of Computing a few years ago. Recognizing that GIS is more than geography these days, that today you have to work with sensors and computer vision and drones and all of those kinds of things that go into applied computing. And so that's where we sit budgetarily right now. But most of the funding that we've received has never been programmatic funding, if you will. It's very much been a project by project sort of a funding arrangement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Then follow up, just a question. I think it was 4 years ago, maybe 5, we had an opportunity to take advantage of from a contractor that had done some contract services for the USGS. And the state purchased some GIS layers or information, and I think they landed in your wheelhouse. And does that sound familiar? And
yes.
And I was just wondering, was that a value? Was that, you buy stuff, and was that a good move on our part? Does that provided information that was that enhanced the things that you try to do?
Mr. Hammerlink,
Representative,
do you want to tell us that we were wrong on something? That'd be great.
Yeah.
No, I will not say that you were wrong on that. Just to speak a little bit to that was a $2 million budget amendment that supported a new statewide terrain model and contour, if you will, contour line topographic mapping product as an add-on to that. We did a public-private partnership on that for a portion of that money. The company that we work with is Wolpert, and we continue to have a good relationship with them. And in fact, we've since partnered with them on some additional federal grant money where we're doing some workforce training for University of Wyoming students, which has been really valuable. And so as a result of that, our sort of piece of that then was to create a LiDAR data portal, which you can access today. And you can download both the terrain model data and the derivative products, if you will, the map products, the contour line products that come from that. But I guess here's the catch, right? So the size of that data is enormous. And so there were funds there to support the storage of that data, and we store some of that in the cloud, and we store some of that at the University of Wyoming Data Center on campus. But that costs money, right? And so the arrangement that we've been able to make with our neighbors across the street at the data centers, as we've been able to pay for that data storage up front for them, and so. That money is actually coming to an end here in June. We were able to set up an arrangement so that we don't need to turn off the lights on that data server, that we can keep that on. We were able to sort of pay in advance, if you will, but those dollars run out in a year. And so while we've been able to generate a great product that is accessible by county engineers, other groups looking at, using that data for sort of a first look and shovel-ready kind of work, or looking at stormwater drainage, or anything you might use elevation data for, right? At kind of at a GIS level. Yeah, it's a tenuous resource because there will not be funding to continue to make that data available come the end of calendar year 2027.
Follow up, please.
So what is, do you have an estimated cost of how to continue it? Or so you'll be presenting that to appropriations in the fall, or what's your plan?
We haven't had that specific conversation yet, and it's probably a conversation we need to have with ETS and some other groups. There could be other partners on this. This could be a place where other groups that are collecting LiDAR data around the state could also contribute to this as well. There are business models where you're able to do some cost recovery on this for value-added products that might come out of something like this if there are private partners that are interested, for example. But again, sort of the issue is there's nowhere where we can really bring this, right? There is not a coordination body where we can bring a particular issue like this.
Okay. Mr. Hammerlink, thank you very much. Really appreciate you sticking around, especially being across the pond there. Really, really do appreciate your time and your testimony today. Thank you very, very much. And seeing no further questions, we'll let you get to bed.
I will. I'll listen in. I'll stay to the end.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. So we've got two more people here, and we've got about 40 minutes left on the schedule here. So what I'd like to do is go ahead and bring up Laramie County GIS as well as BLM. We'll bring you both up if you don't mind.
And Mr. Chairman, if I might, Mr. Garcia from YDOT is also here. He's not on the agenda, but he also has some information that I think could be relevant to the discussion.
Well, then let's bring him on up as well. We'll fill all three of these seats. And we'll start with Laramie County GIS. Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Chairman. One moment, please. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you to the committee for taking up this topic. My name is Jordan Evans. I serve as the application lead for Laramie County's Information Technology Department, and I've been working in local government GIS in Wyoming for about 14 years and have been previously involved in many of the governance things that Nancy had mentioned, including the technical advisory group that was previously mentioned. And I've served several terms as a representative for YGO, which is our state's professional organization for GIS professionals, as well as the coordinator for the Cheyenne and Laramie County GIS Cooperative, which is where we try to bring some sort of governance and standards to GIS at a local government level between Laramie County and the city of Cheyenne and various other local government agencies that work here. And that's a model that's worked for us since the mid-90s pretty well. It gives me insight both into the technical and policy side of GIS, and it's given me ample opportunity to have worked closely and collaboratively with many other municipalities and counties across the state to share ideas and solutions to common problems. So local governments were some of the earliest adopters of this technology, and we've been doing this work for decades, often without the benefit of a coherent statewide framework to plug into. That perspective, I think, is useful for this committee because a lot of what gets decided at the state level lands on local governments and on the public in ways that aren't always obvious from the top down. Wyoming has had excellent GIS, or does have excellent GIS practitioners. The people working hands-on with this data at the state agencies, at the university, across state government, in the private sector, and in counties and municipalities, we all talk to each other. We cooperate. We've built a functional community largely out of goodwill and a shared desire to best serve the citizens of our state. And what we have lacked is a governance structure that survives administration changes, which we've all spoken to. What we've had instead is a series of good starts that didn't stick. Nancy did a great job walking you through that history, and it's pretty instructive in my mind. WGIAC, TAG, each of these represented a serious effort to get coordination right, and each eventually lost its footing when priorities shifted at the executive level. That's not a failure of the people that were involved. That's what happens when government depends on a champion in the governor's office rather than on durable institutional authority. At the local level, we feel that the impact of these fits and starts pretty directly. Local governments are the authoritative sources for many of the potential framework data sets that would make up a common public base map. So when we're talking about framework data sets, that's really when we're saying that a good governance should be built around data, we're talking about common framework data that everyone can use. Members of the public, members of state, federal, local governments, addresses, subdivisions, roads, zoning. You probably know all of them. I think Karen will speak to them a little bit more specifically. But being able to make those framework data sets in a way that is standardized and commonly accessible across all levels of government and to the public is really kind of, when we're talking about good governance needs to be around the data, that's what we're meaning. At the local level, we assign the addresses. We approve the local roads. We map parcels both for tax assessment purposes and subdivision of land for conveyance. Many counties and municipalities are responsible for setting zoning districts, as well as many other kinds of geographic data I can demonstrate in a moment. However, I think you guys have seen a lot of demonstrations of the map, so in the interest of time, I think I'll skip my demo. However, while this is our responsibility at the local level, there is not really any guidance or standardization that instructs us on how to do this in a way that serves anybody other than our direct citizenship. There's no mechanism to enforce consistency across town or county lines or state lines. Authoritative data on things like roads, parcels, land ownership, or imagery, we're working around gaps rather than building on a solid foundation that is shared among all of us. And that matters to more people than you might think, because GIS is infrastructure. It's how emergency responders route to a scene. It's how engineers site utilities. It's how landowners understand the boundaries of their land. These are all, GIS is an integral part of all of these jobs. When that data is inconsistent, undiscoverable, or just missing, the cost doesn't show up as an inconvenience to an individual, but it also shows up as time lost for businesses and can then lead to important business or even life safety decisions made on bad information. In addition to state and local data owners, some very significant framework data is the purview of various federal agencies, which Karen can speak to more directly. Much of that federal data is critical to how most of Wyoming functions, and the state has no authority to mandate how it's created or maintained. We can standardize how we consume it and reference it, but we don't own it. I raise this not to complicate things. Rather, I think any legislation that emerges from this process needs to be honest about jurisdictional limits. A framework data standard that only accounts for data that state controls is going to leave significant gaps at the local and federal levels. So where do we go from here? Speaking from the perspective of a longtime public servant at only the local level, I would like to see this committee explore how to best define what data is shared as framework data and tackle how that data is managed responsibly for the long run. I don't think statute is the right place to define what framework data sets are. That question is technical and administratively complex, and it deals with tough questions surrounding data stewardship, jurisdictional issues, and technical standards that will evolve over time. Legislating those specifics risks locking in answers before we fully understand the questions, and it puts the legislature in a position of potentially managing something it wasn't designed to manage. What statute can and should do is grant clear authority to an agency to work those questions out. Give ETS, or whichever body this committee identifies as appropriate, the statutory mandate and staffing to serve a working group or commission or panel or whatever form of oversight you feel is appropriate that would best serve the needs of the people of Wyoming. That group and the staff dedicated to it would develop standards through an established policymaking process and be accountable for the results. That agency can do what legislatures sit with the, sorry, that agency can do with, I don't know what I was trying to write there. Apologies. You can sit with the subject matter experts, hear from the local governments and federal partners, and build standards that actually reflect on how data gets used while leaving the legislature to do the legislature's job, and let the technical aspect be left to a board or commission. The history that Nancy describes tells us what happens when governance depends on the willingness of a given administration. Statute is how you break that cycle, not by prescribing every answer, but by making the governance itself durable. This isn't just a reorganization of state government assets. GIS data touches private industry, agriculture, utilities, emergency services, and ordinary citizens who use county maps to understand their own property. The rancher looking at water data, the engineer scoping a pipeline route, the county assessor managing parcel records, all of them benefit from a state governance structure that is durable and flexible. The Laramie County Cooperative works because people show up in good faith, but good faith isn't a governance structure. It doesn't survive retirements, budget cuts, or change in who's sitting in the governor's office. What we're asking this committee to help build is something that can. And I would happily stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Committee, any questions for Laramie County GIS? So not seeing any up here. Jordan, okay, we do actually have some. Yes, let's go with Representative Nicholas first.
So I'm curious, particularly when you talk about boundaries. I've been involved in a lawsuit or two where people are relying on a GIS location. And then you bring in the surveyors and you find out that they're about 10 or 15 feet off, even though their instrument says this is accurate within 2 feet. Well, they're not, because I've seen it, at least they didn't back then. So the idea that you can use these to demarc a boundary and rely on it from a legal standpoint, at least at this juncture, that doesn't exist, nor should it. And so that, to me, that's one of the benefits of having regulations, so people understand the limitations of what you can do with GIS from a legal standpoint and a practical standpoint as well, and how those overlap. So it's something we have to be very careful about. And so you talk about hunters who go out and think they're on somebody's property and they're actually someplace where they don't know where they really are, or they're 10 feet or 30 feet off. And that's a common occurrence. So I'm just curious how you take all that and then try to wrap rules and regulations around it without leaving somebody out, or leaving too much reliance on something that is hard to authenticate.
Chairman, may I? That's a very prescient point, and I think that it's a very thoughtful one as well. And I think that basing it around that framework data, as an example of the public land survey system, the corners and where those are in a virtual space, that data is maintained by the BLM. And if we have regulations that say this is the official layer where we are using these as our corners, and all other data, no matter what county you're in, no matter what your state agency is, everything has a legal description that's based around those corners. And we're all using the publicly available corner data set to start building those things off of. That's exactly the kind of regulation that could reduce the kind of risks that you're talking about. I hesitate to call the joke that GIS stands for get it surveyed, but you're absolutely right that it doesn't have a reputation for being legally accurate. But I think that we could get there if we had the coordinated effort that we're discussing here today, where we all agree, I don't have to, as a, in Laramie County, we're really well resourced in this. I know that other counties are not. And so where do I go get a PLSS corner record layer? How old is it? Where did I find it? Where did I download it from? Well, I know that if I go to the state GIS office and I say I need the state's official corner record, then we're all at least building from a common framework.
Senator Cole, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a broad question. Do you really think you're ready? I'm hearing a lot of, it's not really accurate. And I know I would never rely on the aerial survey to get a property line, because I can assure you they're not right. I mean, we just heard. But do you really think it's matured to the point where we can have a reliable set of data that the public could look at, as it sounds like from all the different testimony, is the answer is no. The answer is we're not quite, I mean, I'm just not seeing that we have something just ready to go that can be compiled into something the public can depend on. I guess, do you think we can get there? I mean, that's my question, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Evans?
Through you, Mr. Chair. I believe what you're seeing is the vacuum in coordination and leadership that has existed for the last 32 years. If we had started early in coordinating these things, then I think we would be much more mature as a state. But right now, it's different state agencies, different municipalities, different counties, different private industries, all taking our best good faith effort to work together and do it together. Whereas if there had been unified leadership, then I think we'd be much further along than we are. I think technologically it's possible. The will is there. We just need the coordination and governance structure to make it happen.
Okay, let's go ahead and move on. We've got Ms. Rogers with BLM. Welcome. Not your first time, not your first rodeo to this committee. Welcome back.
Thank you, excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Karen Rogers. I am currently the branch chief of geospatial data management for the Bureau of Land Management in the Wyoming State Office. And it's a pleasure to be here with you today. I'm going to provide you with our perspective on GIS coordination and governance. So as Jordan alluded to, BLM is Bureau of Land Management. We could not do our job were it not for GIS because everything is spatial in our business. And without GIS and GIS technology and geospatial data, we would just still be doing things on paper, which would be really, really slow. Like any other entity, we don't own all the data that we need and depend on. We need authoritative data. And that to me is the buzzword, is authoritative data. And governance would, through conversations of all the people in that governance structure, be able to agree upon what is the authoritative source for XYZ data set. But examples of data that we don't author ourselves that we rely on from the state agency perspective include the Wyoming Game and Fish Department for data such as big game crucial winter ranges and sage grouse leks. We also work closely with Wyoming Oil and Gas Conservation Commission for oil and gas permitting. And we work really closely with Office of State Lands and Investment for ownership data and state leases, in particular Surface Management Agency data or surface ownership data, as has been brought up with corner crossing type issues. So BLM staff share the burden of looking for and identifying authoritative data. I can't tell you, we had meetings over the last few months where people have said, I don't know where to find data. And so when people find the data they're looking for, they will download it to their local laptop, and then the minute they download it, it gets out of date. Like Mr. Giel was saying, data, we're constantly updating data, and if you don't have it in a live stream, then when you download it, it's out of date, and it's going to get more and more out of date the less frequently you go look for new data. But because people don't know where to find that data, they download it, they hoard it, and they don't ever go out and look for the new thing. And so, people are at risk of using bad data, old data. And again, that brings up a lot of costs and bad analysis. And so it is really valuable to us to be able to point our staff to authoritative data for the state that would save us a lot of time and resources. For our own data, we strive to ensure data quality and accessibility, and we're always open to collaborating with state agencies to pursue opportunities to improve data quality. I too have a web mapping application I could show if you want to see examples of how we've been working with the Office of State Lands and Investment lately. Basically, as with all the state agencies who own and acquire and dispose of data, they got a version of BLM surface ownership data in 2010, and they started editing it, making their own indications of land that they disposed of and acquired of, and we've been working in our own silos ever since. And so what BLM maintains is the authoritative source for what's public and private land. Once it leaves federal lands, federal hands, we don't care if it's to whom it belongs on the private side. But we do care if it's state Office of State Lands or Game and Fish or state parks, like we need to know those details. And so the deltas have been getting bigger and bigger between all these agencies who maintain their own records of the lands that they own. And I can tell you that when we first started talking with state lands, there were a lot of discrepancies between what they showed that they owned and what we showed that we owned. And recently, State Lands has done a lot of really good work to clean up some of those discrepancies. We're not there yet. And again, that's only one agency of the 4 that do own and dispose and acquire land. So we have more work to go, and we're looking forward to those conversations to seek clarity in how we can get similar outcomes with other state agencies. I would like to share my screen and show my slides, because it speaks to what Jordan was saying about framework data. All right, is it there?
It's there.
All right. Technology is great when it works. So again, BLM Wyoming, as Jordan said, we are the authoritative source for the public land survey system data, your township range section data, and surface ownership data, and the subsurface mineral estate. For the Minerals and Lands Division, you know,
Can you make that a little larger?
Oh, I can provide these to you.
Okay.
Sorry, apologies. In the Minerals and Lands Division, you know, we run herd on the oil and gas lease sales, mining claims, saleable and leasable minerals, rights-of-ways, other land use permits. For Resources and Policy Planning Division, we create a lot of spatial data for, as you all probably are well familiar, resource management plans and wildlife data, outdoor recreation sites, timber, cultural resources, wild horse and burrow, and that, again, that's just scratching the surface of all the things that we do with GIS. And so I don't want to bore you with the basics, but from the federal government side, in 1990, OMB in A16 published that there were 7, at the time, 7 framework data layers. Cadastre, which is parcels, elevation, geodetic control, governmental units, hydrography, orthoimagery, and transportation. And I have little screenshots of those in just a next slide to help you understand what those all mean, because I know I'm speaking dolphin and you guys speak whale. They added addresses in 2015. So we now have 8 framework data layers. And like Jordan said, they're like the base data that everyone uses for anything and everything. And the Geospatial Data Act of 2018 defines the National Spatial Data Infrastructure, again, a lot of words, a lot of acronyms, as all the geospatial data, the people, the technology, the needs to make it all work. And so here's, again, hopefully a visual to help you understand what all these data are. So addresses are XY coordinate with the building number and street name. Cadastre is parcels, elevation is that XYZ, you know, elevation showing you the lay of the land. Hydrography is information about water. Geodetic control is the foundation of everything. It is how our GPSs work, how, you know, your phone knows where you are. Governmental units are census blocks, city boundaries, cemetery districts, all that kind of thing. Orthoimagery, and then transportation. And so Nancy mentioned at the beginning, NSGIC, the National States Geographic Information Council. I'm a former president of NSGIC, and in about so we've done geospatial maturity assessment for about 26 years. And in the American Society for Civil Engineers, as you may recall, has put out a report card for many years. And then the Coalition of Geospatial Organizations put out a national report card in 2015 and 18, and one is coming out next year. And then there was the Geospatial Data Act of 2018. And so that spurred the idea for the NSGIC GMA to create state level report cards, like Nancy said. And so we went through and created evaluation criteria for each state to look at what they're doing with each theme, each of those 8 themes, as well as coordination, to give them grades of how they're doing, how they stack up against their peers for geospatial maturity. And the important thing for you that I wanted to convey to you is that through that effort, we realized that those data can be split into 2 buckets. One bucket is where the states are the lead for those data, state or local government, and those are addresses, cadastre, transportation, and leaf off imagery, which is what Department of Revenue shared. And then the federal government is the primary lead for data sets such as elevation, hydrography, governmental units, geodetic control, and leaf on imagery. And that is like through the NAEP program. And so NAPE is, again, for agricultural production. So it wants, the peak of senescence of crops, whereas leaf off imagery is great for local government because of assessments, because of emergency response. And so, again, what this highlights is just the need for collaboration. Again, no one entity controls everything. It's not the Lord of the Rings. We all have to work together on all of these different layers to make sure that they are well-funded. In the GMA, part of the evaluation criteria is for each of those framework layers, is there a business plan? Is there an identified steward in the state? Is there coordination with local government? All those things increase your grade and speak to your maturity as a state. And so I think there are some definite things that we can do to improve the maturity for the state of Wyoming's GIS, and we look forward to helping out with that effort. And I would take any questions.
Committee, any questions for, yes, Representative Larson, please.
Thank you. Thank you. And our grade is?
Well, you get a different, I can't remember the overall grade. We're in the process of wrapping it all up right now.
So, well, then as you've worked and seen what other states are doing, are we about on par? Are we in the rear somewhere? Tell us how we're doing.
Mr. Chair.
Rogers?
Representative Larson, Wyoming struggles, again, because of our stops and starts for our coordination. There are several states like North Carolina, Montana, Utah that are stellar. I mean, they've had incredible programs for 30 years, and it shows. Wyoming is good, has gotten much better grades lately for our orthoimagery program, for parcels. Trying to think of, but again, there's a long way to go.
Thank you.
Chairman.
Nicholas?
So I'm curious in Montana or Utah, we could go and see what they have because it's handy, it's easy. Do they have statutory guidelines that address this, or is it just more collaboration and more centric driven by their leadership and by their governments? That's my first question. I got one more after that, but go ahead.
Okay, Chairman. Representative Nicholas, Montana and Utah both have statutes to inform their coordination. And in the GMA again, we evaluate coordination separately. States get higher grades if their coordination is done through statute versus executive order. So it is, rated more highly.
Follow up?
Then just on a different question, because I think obviously we need to go down those paths and figure out what they're doing so we can get educated. But you use the term authoritative data. And I'm curious, are you using that in sense of a graphic sense or a legal sense?
Mr. Chair.
Please.
Representative Nicholas, I'm not a lawyer. I don't play one on TV. But there is a thing in GIS called metadata. And so metadata documents accompany your data, and they tell users who created the data, why, how frequently it's updated, what it should be used for. That is what we consider as the legal backstop for the use of the data. And in the online platforms, you can have a seal that kind of badges the data as authoritative. And I can tell you that North Carolina, their governance group went through the process of making their own definition, like they discussed and agreed upon, what do we mean by authoritative data? And I could see that being a very worthwhile effort, because people throw that term out, and what does it mean? And I think that would be like the first good thing, order of business for a governance group is, what is authoritative data? What do we mean by that?
So just another follow-up.
Please.
So my question then is, in order to accomplish this, other than just piggybacking someone else's work, what's the cost of understanding what you're talking about by us and crafting legislation that doesn't leave any gaps or leave anybody out or in, however that works, and then having compliance with all of the actors and all the players?
Mr. Rogers?
Chairman, Representative Nicholas, I wish I had a good answer for you on that regard. I think any number would just be a wild guess. I think, and you know, there are so many different ways of looking at it. There would be the cost of, you know, a well-funded, supported GIS office that would coordinate all these things. But then again, for those 8 framework layers, for each one, you know, state really should have a business plan for how do they manage those data and coordinate it with, you know, among the state and with the federal agencies that need those data. So it depends on how much we would want to get into that, you know, how willing you are to open the pocketbooks to further that maturity. But it also, I think we're blessed by the size of our state. I mean, we all know each other, and it's relatively easy to, I think, again, through dialogue, we could get a lot done simply through identifying the problems and agreeing to work together to get to things.
Just follow up. Mr.
Last
Chairman.
one, please, and then we're going to move on. We're
So
behind schedule.
Do Utah and Montana have a separate GIS kind of a department or component of one of their agencies? So they got 2 or 3 people that are kind of run the show and do and facilitate, operate this kind of program?
Chairman.
Please.
Representative Nicholas. So Montana's GIS shop is out of their state library, interestingly, and they do have a staff of, I think, 6 or 8. And in Utah, they have the Utah Geographic Resource Center, UGRC, which is staffed, you know, similarly like 10, 12 people. But that said, again, we can learn a lot from other states, and I think there are good things to beg, borrow, and steal from other states. But one of my favorite sayings is just like there's 50 ways to leave your lover, there's 50 ways to build a state spatial data infrastructure state program. And I think, again, with the GIS professionals that we have, we can figure out what works for Wyoming.
Thank you.
Please.
While I'm doing that, let's see. My name is Vince Garcia, I'm the GIS ITS program at White. And with me is, oh, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Can you
My
pull
name
that
is-
mic a little closer?
Sure. My name is Vince Garcia. I'm the GIS ITS program manager at White. And with me is our director, Darren Westby, and deputy director, Taylor Rossetti. So I didn't prepare any statements, but I do want to kind of show you a couple of things that we're doing with the Department of Transportation. And I also kind of want to impart some things. Jordan, Karen, Nancy, Jeff, Heidi, we're all friends. We will work together. We've known each other for a long time. I do want to make that very clear. I do think that governance would be very important for us to really be more cohesive. And I'm going to talk to a few words that begin with C, cohesion being one of them, collaboration being another. Consistency, we really do want to be able to share information, but I think there's a couple of things that are kind of important to be able to do that. We need some sort of a council or a committee to be able to oversee. And I think we need some sort of a clearinghouse. We need a well-funded mechanism for us to be able to share information and make it available to other parties. So I just wanted to show you a couple of things that we're working on, and our friends at LSO talked about this. This is going to be important tomorrow. If you haven't seen it before, this is our public map that is a GIS-based system. It is used extensively. The information that we use, did I cover that up? I'm trying to minimize this. I don't use Zoom very often, so you'll have to forgive me.
Mr. Chairman, while he's looking that up, could you ask him to keep that road open going down to Cheyenne tomorrow?
That one that's already turned orange.
No promises. But this is really critical to the citizens of Wyoming. Our total Wyo road-based travel information system gets about 2 billion hits per year. This map gets about half of it, so it's critical. And it has to run 24 hours a day. So in our case, GIS isn't just 8 to 5, it's 24 by 365, and it has to be. I wanted to show you something on this map that you might not have seen. This is brand new, and why is my map not showing up? I'm using a hotspot because I gave up on the internet, so. And that may be the problem. But I'm going to forego that.
Do you guys want to sneak out the side door, ETS?
I am not trying to criticize.
Nobody's looking.
Oh, wow. It's still really. So I do want to show you something that we just recently added to the map. If I click on any road segment, there is now an elevation information that the public can get to. So it's constantly evolving, this map. And you can see that it's showing that it goes from about 8,000 feet to roughly 9,500 feet, thereabouts. Important information for the public, especially the people pulling RVs, motorcycles, bicyclists, those type of people. That's just one thing. And again, it's hit a lot. It's got to be up and operational because so many people depend on it.
Kind of like the internet.
Pardon me?
Kind of like
As long as they have the internet. I've talked to many of you about the importance of blowers and the importance of trying to reduce blowers. This is a situation where GIS is very much embedded into agencies. It's critical to our operations. I'm not going to get into too much detail about this, but you can see these are the 3 highest blowover incident locations in the country. And we are using this type of GIS information to be able to analyze these things, to be able to improve upon our processes, and to be able to effectuate safety changes. So these are just a couple of maps I wanted to show you that are GIS based, just to give you a sense of why it's important to the agencies and why it's important to be embedded in the agencies. So, and I'll stand for questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And I think it's really good. No offense, but bring the best for last for this committee to have this committee be able to understand what the GIS layers and everything that we talk about on this committee and why it's so imperative that we have good GIS data, governance structure, all that, looping it back to one of the 2 agencies that this committee has a very strong nexus with. So thank you. Committee, any questions for Mr. Garcia? Seeing none, thank you both very much. That will take us to public comment. Is there any, you do have a question. You guys are so good at waiting until I have completely finished off and moved on.
Well, you keep giving me this sign.
I haven't done it since early this morning.
My hand's sore. So, Mr. Chairman, just an observation to you and the co-chairman as you give direction moving forward. It seems like we've got agencies and government and city agencies and agencies. The one anomaly that I see there is Mr. Hammerlink in that funding source, because he's kind of this illegitimate piece out there in hanging out there without any funding source. And so he's in the school of computing now. So do we try to attach something into their budget, or as Director Klein moves forward? I guess I'm just asking, let's not leave that out of the conversation and figure out, because I think that's some critical access on how they do that, please.
And Representative Larson, I really appreciate that, because there's 2 appropriators that are fully at fault for doing exactly what the problem is, that he's an illegitimate department, I believe is what I heard, or something along those lines. But we want to make sure that as we're going through this, what I'm understanding you say is that while we have our political subdivisions that we're talking state, city, county, that we're not forgetting about UW as a clearinghouse contributor. Okay. So, and I don't disagree with you on that. That's why we have him here. I'll say Representative Geringer did a good job herding everybody in together to get everybody talking about this. So kudos and appreciation to that. So any other questions for our witnesses? Seeing none?
Not a question. Follow-up, in that, the last time I looked, his agency basically reports to the JAC. At least that's the way it has been recently in the last couple of years. And so to me, it's probably a conversation to make sure that we're all on the same page.
Well, and we've actually had that discussion numerous times as well, and I agree with you on that. So I think as we're going down this process and what we decide to develop as far as a governance structure on the GIS, yes, that's probably going to be the case. We'll figure out who reports to where, what committee, all that kind of stuff. But really what we need to focus on is a governance system for the GIS framework, get that put together. So we've heard from everybody out here in the committee in the ether. Is there any further questions for our witnesses? Okay, you are all excused. Thank you very much. Let's go ahead and move forward. Public comment on this. Is there anybody on the line? No? Okay. And the reason I keep asking for that, just so you guys are all aware, we do get a notification of who's going to sign up and who wants to talk. And we typically have at least one person that likes to say everything. And we don't know whether they're going to actually testify or not. So we always have to make sure we ask whether or not they raise their hand on that particular topic. So with that, is there any committee directives? Representative Geringer, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I would suggest that we continue this discussion and explore with this group of professionals and others, illegitimate or not, through Wyoming experience and looking at what other states do, a formalized GIS governance structure, including the oversight, a mechanism by which to standardize data, where to store it, and designate what is authoritative data, and protection of those data resources with an idea of costs to do so, and then report back to the committee at the next meeting with suggestions on potential legislation.
Okay, we can certainly look at doing that. Hold on just a second. My concern for that is that would bring us to having a development of a piece of policy and would only give us one meeting to take a serious hard look at it. Is that enough time for you? And I'm thinking more along the lines of, we can do one of two things here. If we do not have a piece of legislation before us starting at our next meeting, we won't have anything to actually move forward with and adjust as we go forward. So we have a potential for another working group, right? Or you can actually, we could probably draft, work with you guys to work with LSO to draft legislation for us to prepare to see next meeting of what that would look like. That would be my recommendation.
Agreed.
Okay, so we will need a motion brought forward. Representative Larson?
So, Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to make a motion, if I might.
Please.
That we'd ask Representative Geringer to work with the stakeholders. He could certainly reach out to any of the committee members, but to work with the stakeholders in LSO to get a draft piece of legislation that we could have an in-depth conversation on their next meeting.
Perfect. Do I have a second? Second was by Geringer, I believe. I heard it down there, so we'll give it to you.
And so what I'd like to do is have LSO, you may just go in immediately and pick out the Utah, Montana, maybe North Carolina statutes that are relevant and just circulate those to us so we can kind of look at them, figure out an understanding to it so that we have something more background when it shows up as part of the LSO's task.
Probably not a bad idea to just have those to do comparatively. We're probably going to find pieces of each one of those that we like, but yeah, that's fine. Committee, any further discussion? Mr. Co-Chairman?
Thank you. I just wanted to Representative Geringer, your vision of a governance structure. We've talked about this before, but I'm trying to get an idea what your thoughts are on. We can put policy in place and we can put statutes in place. Are you also looking at some type of entity that would govern this, a board or a commission, or is that kind of where we're headed?
Representative Geringer?
Mr. Chairman, I would say yes, a council of sorts that is with authority through a state agency, perhaps, depending on what kind of structure. As we look at other states and see what really is working best, it could develop into something along those lines, yes.
And just from the notes that I've got here, we would start with having our state GIS coordinator in there. We have a county liaison, UW liaison, probably a Department of Revenue, considering how much information is shared back and forth with there. We saw that. WIDOT, of course. Just about every agency is going to have some level. And so I would suggest, as you guys are doing this, try to whittle that down to where it's not, 1,000 hands in the cookie jar. Get the stakeholders that have consistent leadership in this role to be able to be there and look at that. But I think having a craft of 5 to 10 people on a board that can have recommendations to set forward and oversee on rules and stuff like that. So, okay. Without any further discussion, seeing none, all those in favor of the motion to have Representative Geringer, stakeholders, and LSO work together on a piece of legislation for consideration at our next meeting, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no? Oh. Okay, that motion is passed. Thank you very much. That was a very heavy lift. It is 3:34. I think I want to take just a little bit of a break for everybody here. Probably about, it's 3:34, so let's call it 3:45. Be back in here and we'll get going. And we will do workers' compensation and get that rolling. Thank you very much for everybody else showing up.
Good. Well, you asked me to start the meeting. So we're on to our 3:30 topic, Wyoming Workers' Compensation Experience Modification Rate discussion. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to turn it over to Representative Larson. He's going to begin the conversation on this topic.
We good to go, Mr. Chairman?
We're good to go.
So members of the committee, workers' compensation conversations could generally go to 2 or 3 different committees, could go to labor, could go to appropriations, could end up here. I've been working on an issue with Mr. McKay and some of our folks that are having worker compensation issues specific to this conversation on employer modification rates. And I looked at this committee, and we've got, on this end, we've got a guy that represented workers' comp and represented the other side. Legally, on the other end of the dais down there, we've got a guy that probably has helped treat people who have been injured in workplace injuries, and every place in between, we've got people who pay workers' compensation and are dealing with trying to understand what contractors are safe to work within their various industries, whether it's in oil and gas or construction. So this interim topic evolves around the experience modification rating, which is referred to as an EMR or EMOD, given by the department to an employer and is the basis for their monthly premiums. Experience modification ratings are actuarial calculations based on the type of industry the employer is in and taking into account his unique claims history over a 3-year period to produce a premium that is the best indicator of the employer's future monetary risk for accidents to ensure the agency has adequate funding to pay all the associated claims. And experience modification rating, an EMR, is not an indicator of a company's safety practices. There's a current practice nationwide that began in the 1980s where private industry began requesting EMRs from contractors or subcontractors to evaluate the safety spirit and general competence of those contractors. This shift occurred as safety laws become more rigid and corporations sought objective metrics to enforce safety regulations on their work sites. States that handle workers' compensation and actuaries agree that using the EMR approach is flawed, and states such as Indiana, Texas, and Virginia have adopted legislation to prohibit that practice. We had House Bill 168 last year that we didn't get to that partially addressed this matter, but Mr. Chairman, what we're hoping to do is in this conversation today is to maintain and enhance the culture of safety, but eliminate the flawed metrics or data used to hamper businesses in Wyoming. After the conversation today, I'm hoping that we can do similarly what we just done with Representative Geringer and let us work with the stakeholders to move an LSO to move forward with a draft that would be ready for the next committee meeting. But before we do that, we just felt it was really important for the committee to understand the experience modification rating and how it is impacting Wyoming businesses. So would like, if you, with your permission and turning this over to you, we've got the Department of Workforce Services here to help us understand the experience modification rating. And then we've got some stakeholders from the, with Mr. McKay and Ms. Little and I'll join them on further explaining that. So
Okay.
does that make sense, Mr. Chairman?
Sure. Thank you, Representative Larson. Okay, so let's hear from Wyoming Workforce Services.
Hello, Mr. Chairman. I am Liz Gagan, and I am the Director of the Department of Workforce Services. And with me, I have Deputy Director Jason Wolf and our Administrator of Workforce Programs, Karen Biebensee. And with that, I'll turn it over to Deputy Director Wolf to go through some slides.
Yeah. Mr. Wolf, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I did prepare
it's about 15 slides, I think, and with your permission, I'll just kind of go through those, kind of gives a brief overview of workers' compensation. I know not everybody's familiar with the process, but just kind of some highlight overview, and then kind of get to kind of what we're seeing as the issue for employers and some solutions like Representative Larson alluded to. So I do also, just before we get started, I have William Hansen is our contracted actuary. He should be online if they can let him in, just in case any actuary type questions come up from the committee.
You might let him in, but let's just keep the large screen up
Okay.
though.
And he is online now, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, great.
All right, Mr. Chairman. So if we go to slide 2 of the presentation, just gives kind of an overview of Wyoming workers' compensation. So obviously employers pay premiums into the workers' compensation fund. Workers' compensation, as some of you probably know, is the workers' compensation fund is outlined in Article 10, Section 4 of the Wyoming Constitution. Wyoming is what we refer to as an exclusive state fund. There are 4 in the United States: Wyoming, North Dakota, Washington, and Ohio. And then employers, by benefit of getting coverage through us, whether they're required coverage or optional coverage, and I'll get to that in a little bit, but they receive, reduced medical expenses because we pay the bills by a fee schedule that's outlined in our rules. And then they also get the benefit of what we call the exclusive remedy, which means that they can't be sued by their injured employee. So moving on to slide 3, again, just kind of sets up a little overview there. The Workers' Compensation Act is outlined in Wyoming Statute 27-14-101 through 27-15-103. So all employers doing business in the state have to register with workers' compensation. From that registration, we then determine their classification, and then we also determine whether or not they are what we call required coverage. So in the Constitution and in statute, it expressly says that all extra hazardous industries must have coverage through Wyoming workers' compensation, and optional employers are those who are not extra hazardous, may opt into the system. The legislature has determined under 27-14-108 those industries that are deemed extra hazardous. And so any industry from their NAICS code that is enumerated in 27-14-108 is required coverage under the law. Moving on to slide 4, just kind of talks about how we calculate workers' compensation premium. So essentially, it's the employer's total payroll divided by 100 times their EMR factor times their base rate. So we divide that by 100 because we often refer to it as how much an employer pays per $100 of payroll. So for example, if your rate is $1.50, then you pay $1.50 per $100 of payroll in premium. Okay, slide 5. So Wyoming statute does require us to go through an annual rate making process. And so we have a contracted actuary who goes through and analyzes all of our documentation, payments, premium, income, all that stuff. And then we assign what's called a base rate to 144 different NAICS codes. And I should probably back up, but a NAICS code stands for North American Industry Classification System. It is a common system that's used by Bureau of Labor Statistics. And so that's where we get the NAICS codes. And then after the analyzation, after the actuary does the analyzing of the data, we hold a public hearing every year on those base rates where we go over how they were calculated, what information was taken into consideration, et cetera. And then finally, the governor approves those base rates for the upcoming rate year. And then just historically, slide 6 kind of looks at the last few years of base rate trends. Really over the last decade, base rates have been trending down. So you'll see that in 2024, we did a 6.5% base rate decrease and then a 12% in 25. And then for 2026, we did a 15% base rate decrease. Generally, you'll see these larger ones be in thanks in part to a bill that was passed in 2024, House Bill 72, which allowed us to consider up to 5% of the investment income on the fund as revenue to the fund. So we're able to give a little bit better discount rate basically because of our investments have done well. So. Looking at slide 7, just kind of explains the experience modification rating. So generally when you register your business in Wyoming and you're a new employer, you're going to have what we call a 1.0 EMR. That means you're no better, no worse than your people in that industry. So if you have below a 1.0, for example, like a 0.65, that means you're going to pay less than the base rate for your industry. If you have more than a 1.0, that means you're going to pay a higher premium. You're going to pay more than your base rate for the industry. Moving on to slide 8, just kind of, excuse me, what an EMR does. So an EMR adjusts, again, that base rate up and down, depending on your claims experience. And we take into account a 3-year history of an employer's claim experience when we calculate their EMR. And basically what an EMR does for the purposes of workers' compensation is it produces a modifier that is what we believe is the best predictor of future monetary risk for an employer, meaning how much is this employer going to cost the fund? What an EMR is not, it is not a safety indicator for how safe a business is. Looking at slide 9, kind of what all goes into the calculation of an EMR. So again, that 3-year claims history for an employer, the overall size of the company, both the number of employees and the amount of payroll that they have, their type of business, so their NAICS classification is a factor. Their total losses, both aggregate and individual losses on a particular claim. And then also whether or not something is made chargeable to their EMR or non-chargeable. And a good example of something that we would non-charge is like a motor vehicle accident that wasn't a person's fault. Our Attorney General representatives recoup some money on those that we make that non-chargeable. And then moving to slide 10, as Representative Larson alluded to, this kind of gets into the problem I think that we're seeing and kind of what we're hearing from employers. Generally, the EMR is incorrectly being used as a safety metric for an employer, meaning, if they're above a 1, and sometimes depending on the general contractor, they may not even allow somebody to enter a bid on a job if their EMR is above a 1. And that kind of gets to the heart of the issue of what we're discussing here. But as Representative Larson did say, 3 states thus far have passed legislation kind of limiting the use of that EMR, whether it's for, not allowing them to collect that EMR at all, or what have you. But, and again, that I would just note is in a lot of the, actuarial literature and workers' comp literature, this is becoming more of an issue where we're seeing some of these folks misuse what an EMR is supposed to be used for. And that's why we're seeing these states pass different legislation. Moving on to slide 11. So why is the EMR not a good, accurate safety metric? So again, the EMR is supposed to be used as purely an insurance metric that allows us, and this is the one I think I have so a little bit of an error on this slide. The EMR is not actually to recoup expenses, it's to predict expenses going forward. So the EMR is really a prospective measure of what we believe this employer is going to cost the system. So it's not retrospective, it's prospective. The EMR is what we call a lagging indicator and not a reliable metric to predict future safety practices on its own. EMR measures accident costs, not necessarily the effectiveness of the company's safety program. And finally, the data that we use, the data that EMR is calculated off of is pretty stale. Like I said, it can go back that 3 years, 4 years really, because if an accident happens today, it doesn't start affecting your EMR for another year. So the data is pretty old, and a lot can happen to a business in that amount of time. It could change hands. Certainly different safety practices are put in place, et cetera. On slide 12, kind of looking at what are more accurate safety metrics that we wish people would look at when evaluating company safety is safety culture assessments, written safety plans, their safety training practices, how much safety training they do with their staff, leadership engagement, and then hazard identification and mitigation. Really, probably as the bottom of that slide indicates, what's a better measure is a company's what they call a TRIR, or total recordable incident rate. And that is, any OSHA recordable, which is generally anything that requires more than first aid, should be reported on a employer's OSHA 300 report. And again, the reason that's a better metric is because it's uniform across the United States. Employers use that same formula. So it is generally considered a better indicator of company safety than an EMR. And then slide 13, just some statistics from our system. So currently we have 17,444 registered companies within our Wyoming workers' comp system. About 1,751 of those have an EMR at 1 or above, and then actually 1,526 have actually above an 1 EMR, which is roughly about 9% of our employers. The NAICS codes are kind of far and wide, but when you look at the 1,500, generally those are NAICS codes that fall into some kind of construction industry that we're seeing have above a 1 EMR.
Jason, quick question for you. Can you, and maybe I'm just glossing over here, but you have 1,751 employers have an EMR of 1 or above, and of these, 1,526 are actually above a 1.0. So meaning that 1.0, so that 1,751 is, I guess, what's the purpose of that as opposed to just the 1,526?
Yeah, good question, Mr. Chairman. So probably didn't need to put that in there, but the 1,751 is inclusive of those 1,526. So really that 200 and some odd difference there are probably those newer employers who are assigned a 1 from the time they register, and they don't have a claims history in order for us to calculate an EMR. So
That makes sense. Thank you.
Just kind of moving on to slide 14 and kind of what Representative Larson had mentioned is kind of what we see as some possible solutions to the issue. Obviously, House Bill 168 that didn't make introduction this last legislative session. Really what that does is so it had basically 2 sections, and what section 1 would do in that bill is really limit or prohibit the use of the EMR as a safety metric, making it so that general contractors couldn't use that to forbid a contractor from bidding on a job, or not use it to say they couldn't let them a contract or whatever because their EMR is above a 1. And then section 2 of House Bill 168 really kind of looked at us an aspect that we kind of already have in statute that would allow us to non-charge some things to employers. The current way that it's set up in statute is that the employer has to apply for that to the division. And really what section 2 would do is allow us a little bit more authority within the division to determine if something's non-chargeable from the get-go, if we know that. We don't always know that when an injury initially happens, but somewhere down the line that may happen. And so that section 2 really just kind of allots us a little bit more authority to make that determination on our own and keep the employer apprised of, we don't feel this is non-chargeable and here's why. And then some other things for consideration that might need some more discussion, but we currently have a deductible program, and I guess I'll start with the second bullet point there, sorry, Mr. Chairman. So what I'll call an EMR buy-down option, and this is kind of an issue where maybe somebody had a really bad accident that cost them more money than anticipated, and that might be driving their EMR higher. In essence, a buy-down program might allow an employer to pay the fund back in exchange for us making some of those charges non-chargeable to their experience rating, which would lower their overall EMR. And then also kind of changing the way we operate our deductible program. So currently we have a deductible program that you can sign up for as an employer. You can elect anywhere from $1,000 deductible all the way up to $100,000 deductible. And currently what we do with that is, if you, let's say you choose the $5,000 deductible, we give you a 10% discount off of your base rate. So again, if you have a $1.50 base rate, you sign up for the $5,000 deductible, we'll give you 10% off that $1.50, however much you're paying in premium, basically. The way most states operate their deductible program is what we would call a net deductible program. And so the way that would operate is the employer, if they elected a deductible, they would then be responsible for that first, whatever they selected as their deductible, let's say the $10,000. They would be responsible for that $10,000. Then we pick up and carry the rest after that $10,000. The difference in the two programs is the way it currently operates is it would be, they're just getting that base rate percentage off, and the charges on that claim are still going to affect their overall experience rating. And it really, like I said, the way most workers' comp programs operate, that money that they pay in a deductible shields them from that being calculated into their EMR. So I think that would be a good change and worth looking at. I'll pause there. That was kind of a lot. If there's any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Senator Kolb, and then Mr. Kochek.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question about the EMR and the number. Is there a way we can shield that number, or is there a federal regulation that says that number has to be available for outside entities? I mean, can we just say you don't show what the EMR is? We just don't allow it. Is that possible? That's my question.
Mr. Wolf?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, and just to be clear, there's no federal regulation over this, so it is all, I mean, we have control over it in the state, you guys as legislators do. And I think that's kind of what House Bill 168 aimed to do, was basically prohibit general contractors from requesting this, like they couldn't have access to the EMR. So, and I look to Representative Larson to correct me if I'm wrong, but.
Representative Larson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Senator Cole kind of brings us to the heart of the whole issue, is that you've got two issues here. One is if you're doing business in the state of Wyoming, and one if you're doing business as a Wyoming company in other states. And so you may be a manufacturer, or you may be a service company in the oil and gas industry. And if you have a master service agreement, or if you're bidding on something, if you have an EMR over one, your annual your annual master service agreement would be disqualified. They wouldn't let you have one, so you couldn't work for that petroleum company in Wyoming or any place else until that gets down. If you were a contractor, you wouldn't be able to bid on that project. And so what we're saying is, in Wyoming, what we think is a reasonable effort is, in Wyoming, any work that is requesting safety data, that they can't allow the use of an EMR in determining that safety evaluation. They can use the OSHA 300, the TRIR, and some things of that nature. So they wouldn't be able to use the EMR for that issue. However, if the work's being done in another state and that state allows an EMR to be considered, this ability then for you to go in and you've got an EMR for an incident that happened 3 years ago, and you could buy that down to a 1, would then allow you to continue on with the master service agreement or to bid if that was allowed in another state. So it's kind of like having a higher deductible in your health insurance, that you'd be able to buy that down. And then the other part of this EMR, Mr. Chairman, if you will, is, you know, if my employee is driving to work and is going through Shoshone, and it's in my pickup on my company time, and Representative Nicholas runs the intersection and plows him, and he's injured, and it's a serious injury, that can impact my EMR. And it wasn't anything to do with my employee's fault. It was all that crazy guy, Nicholas, that done that. And so this non-chargeable thing, you know, I don't know that I can make that non-chargeable. But now if we change that to where the agency can then come back in and say, that's non-chargeable, it wasn't their fault. Or if Representative Wiley has a crew on a site that has other subcontractors working as well, and one of his employees gets hurt as a result of the other contractor's mistake, that could impact his EMR. Boom, make it go up. But this allows that to be non-chargeable. In what the agency has really worked on really hard in the past is to focus on a culture of safety. And so if Representative Wiley he gets plowed by somebody in the intersection, he's had one incident in the last 3 years, but it was an expensive one. But it's the only incident he's had. But yet I'm working in manufacturing, and I've got I've got a recordable incident every month. It might be something in the eye, it might be a cut, it might be stitches, it might be a flash burn, it might be a variety of things that run $1,000 per incident. But his EMR could be higher than mine because it was more expensive and could have a greater impact on payment to the fund. But it's not that he's actually more safe than my company because I don't have this culture of safety. So we're trying to rectify all of that and reflect on accurate cultures of safety, which the EMR doesn't reflect, if that makes sense. Whew.
Okay, Mr. Co-Chairman. Yeah, I'm a little confused on how what affects then, you, on slide 9, if you guys look at slide 9, there were 6 bullet points on there on how what affects an employer's EMR. First question is that an empirical calculation or are these all subjective? Because it seems to me, how do you get to the 1 or less than 1 or more than 1? Like you got to have the 3-year claims history. So it's either yes or no. And are there numerical calculations to each one of these 6 things that eventually gets you to that number 1 or plus or minus?
Mr. Chairman, yeah, great question. And this is where it becomes kind of very complex and might turn to Bill to answer some of those. But yeah, generally the EMR will have, we have, well, I'll just ask Bill and see if maybe he can explain this is where it gets kind of complex though.
Certainly, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. I can't quite see everyone's name, but I did hear the question and the sort of the estimation of the experience mod does follow, I'll call it a standardized formula, and it's pretty commonly used in a lot of other states, monopolistic or not. But the essence of determining the experience mod is to compare what we derive as the expected losses per year or for that 3-year historical period. So we come up with an expectation of what the average would be. And then it's the actual claims cost during that period compared to the expected that determines the modification factor. So if the actual losses are above the expected loss rate or what was expected for that period, again, for that employer, for that rating classification, they would be above 1. If their actual losses are below the expected, then their modification to the premium would be below 1. Now there's some elements that are a little bit in the weeds, not on this slide here, but I'll mention them because of some of the examples that have already been given. One is we have a maximum single loss cap. So even in the event of extreme loss, for experience rating purposes, the dollars are capped in the 250,000 range. It's actually different than that. That's just to give you a ballpark. The other thing that we do is in the context of sort of information, what's predictive and what's not predictive, we really give much more weight to say the first $25,000 of each claim than we do to the amount that we call excess, that's in the more extreme or higher layer. So there's elements of this experience mod determination that's built to, in essence, get back to what Mr. Wolf referred to a bit ago, and that is we want to be predictive as much as we can and estimate the cost into the next policy period using the employer's experience. So the mechanics, the parameters, all of the elements are actuarially determined, and all the employers essentially follow the same protocol, if you will, or calculation. What varies by the different classes would be your expected loss rate. And so a very simple example would be, let's say, a retail and office worker, someone like myself, would have a very, very low expected loss rate in terms of workplace injuries relative to, say, an industrial class or an energy class that's much higher risk. The expected losses for those types of employers would be much higher. So I'll pause there for a second, see if there's anything we want to explore a little more, if that helps you at least give some context to how the EMOD's determined.
Okay, Bill, I do have a follow-up.
Yeah, I do just have one question. I noticed on, in the slide that says, what affects the employer's EMR, there's the type of business, you know, the NAICS code classification. But if you go back to your very first slide, that the premium is set by the calculation has that code in there as well. So is that like a double whammy for those classifications that are riskier?
So it is not. So think of the Jason, I don't know if you can go to the premium calculation page for a second. We had there's three elements here, and there's some others that follow for discount programs, but the first one here is your employer payroll, and you could consider that to be what we call the exposure base. That's a measure of the size of the business. So if we're talking about, let's say, the same construction business, higher payroll will pay a higher premium, which I think is would make sense, right? The last component at the end here is what we call the base rate. And each class has its own base rate. And the base rate is the average for that class. So across the 144 classes that Jason referred to a little bit ago, those base rates vary, with higher risk employment classes having higher base rates, lower risk having lower base rates. So now if we pick a particular class, be it construction, office, transportation, what have you, it's within that group, within that classification group, then the base rate is for the average. The experience mod then levels or goes above or below 1 for those that have had more claims experience versus those that have had less relative to their group, relative to their class. So it's not double counting, it's just an extension of the rating process.
So that base rate, is that something set by the state or is it national? Or is there a different base rate in Colorado or another state?
So the base rates are determined by me and my staff. We do that annually. We estimate the overall change and then the base rates by class. They're reviewed and approved by Jason and Karen and the team in front of you here, and then submitted for approval to the governor. We review and adjust the base rates annually, but it's for Wyoming specific experience. So this is Wyoming only.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Senator Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have two questions. With this net deductible program, if I go for a $10,000 net deductible deal and I have a lot of $4,000 to $8,000 claims that I'm paying, does that go against my EMR or are those negated on the EMR?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Anderson, so currently, yes, they would go towards your EMR if you were enrolled in our current deductible program as it's outlined in statute. If we moved to that type of net deductible program, then those amounts that you pay per claim would be shielded then, so to speak, from your EMR calculation. That money that you paid into us to cover that claim wouldn't affect your experience.
Then the other question I have, and my knowledge is 16 years old, because that's when I retired. But at that time, we couldn't put our office people on workers' comp. and we wanted to because their claim rate is really low. But now it sounds like, from talking to you two guys, sounds like you do have office people on the.
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. So we do offer what we call a clerical code for people to pay those lower base rates on that less risky class. So even, if a coal mine, let's say, has, 15 admin people, then they can pay that lower rate on those 15 admin people, but pay the higher industry rate for the coal miner.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Representative Wiley.
But those positions that you were just talking about, office, different things, it's non-mandatory, right?
Rolf.
Mr. Chairman, yes, that's correct.
Representative Filer.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So with those positions not being mandatory to pay in, but something was to happen, workers' comp would still cover, right?
Mr. Chairman, so we would only cover if, again, if let's use a miner, for example. So if the company neglected to buy workers' compensation from the state, they had an injury, their person was required coverage under law, then we are mandated by law to pick up that coverage and cover it, even though we haven't collected premium on that person. If it was an optional employer who was not required by law to have the coverage, then we would not pick up that coverage.
Representative Larson.
So are you saying that if I am a non-required company per my NACE code, but I want to be part of workers' compensation, you don't pay claims?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure I followed.
Well, I think what Representative Filer was saying is if he was not required to be in workers' compensation, but opted to be in workers' compensation, and an injury took place, I think what you said is you wouldn't pay any claim.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct, Representative.
And so what's the advantage of him being opting into workers' compensation if you're not going to pay an injury?
Well, Mr. Chairman, so he would still, if he's opted in, he's obviously covering some employees. And so that advantage would be to those employees, I suspect.
What's the advantage to those employees, Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Chairman, so the advantage would be that they're covered under workers' compensation. They would also, the employer would have the advantage of that exclusive remedy as well.
So, Mr. Chairman, but you're confusing me, because if I'm working for Representative Filer, I shuffle papers, and he's elected to his company to be in there, and I'm walking down the hall and I trip and I have an injury, now there's going to be a claim. Are you going to pay that claim or not?
Mr. Wolf.
Mr. Chairman, so if they're optional coverage and they have not elected the coverage, no, we would not cover them.
No, they've elected the coverage.
They've Mr. Chairman.
We also have, Mr. Hansen has his hand up,
Yeah.
but I don't know if that's, if we want to, I'll let whoever wants to tag team that, but Mr. Hansen, Mr. Wolf.
He's my phone a friend.
Okay, so we're phoning the friend, Mr. Hansen, if you would, please.
Absolutely. As I've followed the conversation, I think I know where the disconnect is. So, Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, I believe the previous example was a scenario where it was a coal business or industrial where they opted in for coverage on their industrial workers, but did not for their office workers.
Oh.
And I think that's the example Mr. Wolf just said. Those employees are not covered. If in fact any business in the state opts in to have their office workers covered, so they have in fact paid premiums, they are all covered.
Got it.
If a premium consideration has been provided to the fund, all of those employees are covered.
Thank you.
Perfect. I think you just got that 359 degrees all the way around to 360 for us. So
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, my apologies for not picking up. Sorry.
That's okay. Any further discussion or questions? One more, Representative Filer.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And I think when we talk about, not to go down this rabbit hole of office workers or anybody like that, but that's a lower premium rate that you would pay with your office worker compared to the guy out climbing the roof. But with adding that office worker into the pool, does that lower your rates for everybody else also? So you're not paying that higher premium for that other person? I mean, how does the department be able to decipher if that person is working at a desk or up on a roof, or does the employer have to disclose each one of those?
Mr. Chairman, yeah, so the employers report their monthly or payroll quarterly to us. They tell us which employees are those working in which industry. So it's up to the employer to classify their employers according to their risk.
Okay, hold on just a second down here. I've got Senator Kolb, and then we'll come over to Representative Wiley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. But to clarify, if you had that office worker at a low-risk group and that low-risk person had a large injury for whatever reason, they would be penalized a higher percentage amount because of the class they were in. And that's what you stated earlier, so I'm just verifying this, is that basically you're going to pay a huge penalty for having a low-ranked, a low-risk person have a bad injury. Is that, yes, true or not, or could you help me? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I don't believe that's accurate, but would ask Mr. Hanson to opine on that.
Mr. Hanson.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. So in the example given, and this will be a little bit of a repeat of some of the earlier discussion, but for what I'll call one-off claims or anomalous claims for smaller classes, you will in fact see some impact on the experience mod. However, there's some of the limits in place I talked about before in terms of maximum single loss, and then also the first 15 to 20,000 really are the only is the main part of the claim that would be in the mod. The other dimension we didn't talk about today, and this is even a little more statistical in terms of discussion, is what we call credibility. Okay. And that is a value that we use to measure the information or signal in a particular set of claims information. So you can probably surmise that if I only have one or two office workers, that's a low credibility situation, and I'm not going to give a lot of weight to that. It's fairly random. If I had a very large office building, say a bank, and hundreds of office workers or some other scenario like that, then perhaps there would be more credibility to the rate of claim behavior, the number of claims and the dollars. So while we understand the nature of the potential for a large loss, I don't think the impact of that is intuitive in the sense that one claim is not going to completely throw off an EMR, particularly when it doesn't carry that much credibility. And then the other part of the rating aspect is there are actually caps. There's caps on the low and high side for experience modification factors that come into play if and when an employer does have a collection of higher loss events in a given year. So there's lots of mechanisms in place, some statistical, some statutory, that will help in that case.
Any further questions? Representative Wiley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hate to get into the weeds anymore, but we're here, so let's just go over it a little bit. So I'm looking at this a little bit, and some of these definitions, because we're looking at statistical data here. So the mandatory coverage that people are required to do is classified as extra hazardous, right? So first part of this question, can you please give me the definition of extra hazardous?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Wiley. So the definition, right off the top of my head, so I don't have it right off the top of my head. I do believe that's defined in in our statutes though. But really what determines the extra hazardous is the legislature has outlined those particular classes in that 2714-108 statute.
Perfect, Mr. Chairman. Follow up enough to work off of here. Okay, so if you have certain industries, let's say that may have some hazardous conditions, but it's not considered extra hazardous, and we're not making them mandatory to take the coverage, could that skew what we're looking at here? Say, I don't know, I don't want to pick on anybody, but say a big box store or something. So you have people working with forklifts all day and they're lifting things, and they might not be considered extra hazardous, so they're not opting in, but it could be thousands of employees across the state that we're not considering there. And then it's kind of throwing this whole idea of these EMRs out anyway, because the data that we're using is this big, when we should probably be looking at something that has a pool of this large in there, right?
Mr. Chairman, yeah, and I think we're, again, we could probably spend 2 meetings talking about this, but I think in broad answer to your question is yes. I mean, what we see in Wyoming is because we only are statutorily required to cover those extra hazardous industries, our makeup within our profile is rough rule of thumb, about 80% of the employers in the Wyoming work comp system are extra hazardous. And then about 20% are those what we call optional employers or lower risk class employers. So yeah, I think on a broad answer to your question is our pool's a bit riskier than probably some other states.
Anything further? Nobody wants to dig any more weeds? All right. Mr. Wolf, and or Mr. Hanson, do you guys have anything further beyond what you guys have created there that you guys would like to open any more?
Mr. Chairman, no, I appreciate your time and consideration of looking at this.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I may just offer briefly, I know Mr. Wolf shared at least 3 states where there's been formal lawmaking to sort of address what would be what I'll call an improper use of the EMOD. I also happen to know my home state, which is also a monopolistic state fund, while they don't have formal law to address this within the Ohio Bureau of Workers' Comp. I know they do some things to help manage kind of the information and the EMODs that are produced for the contractor. So it's an issue that I've seen for many years, not decades, and I'm happy that the state of Wyoming is at least taking a look at it and perhaps finding a better way that the contracting entities there can be competitive on the right measures and not considered on the wrong ones.
Okay. All right. Thank you guys very, very much. Appreciate you guys taking all those questions. That'll bring us up to the Wyoming Business Alliance and the AGC. And Lloyd, I don't have you on my agenda. You can wait till public comment. All right, Mr. McKay.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for the time. I'm Rennie McKay, president of the Wyoming Business Alliance. And if you don't know us, we're the private sector organization, share a similar name with the public sector organization, but we represent members from every industry in Wyoming, from every corner of Wyoming and of every size in Wyoming too. And in particular, we work with manufacturers to represent them as part of the alliance, but also kind of specifically what used to be the Alliance for Wyoming Manufacturers. And so this issue really kind of hit home for us because at the Business Alliance, we prioritize workforce as policy issues because workforce and finding talent is so important to just about every employer in Wyoming. And we also look at the business climate as one of the priorities to work on here in Wyoming. So while this doesn't sound really exciting as a topic necessarily on its face, this is a really, really important conversation because this is something that can make a big difference. And we're seeing Wyoming companies losing out on the opportunity for bids and losing millions of dollars right now. So this makes Wyoming companies, this conversation and the potential fixes can bring millions of dollars more in business to the state. And it also can save a lot of money on projects if we have a better, robust bidding process. So I'm really excited that you've taken this up. Thank you so much. I know how many of you actually know this issue firsthand. And Representative Larson is one of those folks. And it's one of those great things, I think, to do policy making in Wyoming when you work with citizen legislators like yourselves who actually know things on the ground and know things from the business perspective. So just a couple of things. Representative Wiley hit on this. This is actually in the Constitution, not just in statute, that this is extra hazardous. So our EMR ratings are higher than a lot of other states because that's in the Constitution. And so that changes the risk pool and drives up the cost of EMRs. And so then if you get that higher EMR, because the other thing that can go into your EMR is the cost of healthcare. And let's say one of your employees has that accident somewhere rural and needs to be life flighted, that drives up your cost and that affects your EMR. So a lot of things can happen here in Wyoming that make the EMR higher. And that's all to the point that the EMR is not a proxy for a safety rating. I think that is something that we're seeing across the country being acknowledged now. But it is still being used because it's been kind of a tradition to use EMR in the contracting process. And this all gets really challenging when you're talking about out-of-state projects potentially that Wyoming companies are bidding on, or in-state projects with somebody out of state, or if there's what is known as a pre-qualification company that gets in between the company and the contractor. And so there are these pre-qualification companies. If you don't even know who you're trying to bid with, you can't call them and talk to them about your EMR, because some of these, as we just heard, this is stale information. You can have a 4-year-old incident and that's what's driving your EMR. But you've got folks who used to be able to just call up that company or provide a letter from the Department of Workforce Services that shows you're a safe company. But if you don't know who that company is to reach out to make sure that your company is can get a bid in, then you just lose that business. So I think that this would be really great. I really can appreciate Representative Larson taking this up. He's gone deep on this issue, and the Department of Workforce Services has been great. You know, these solutions that have come forward have been give and take between some of our members, Representative Larson and Department of Workforce Services, who've just been trying to figure out solutions to make Wyoming more competitive and have a better business climate. So I think that that's a really big thing. If we can not use the EMR as a proxy for safety rating and make that change, I think that would be great. Senator Cole brought up the point about just don't let anybody use it. Unfortunately, we had that conversation and a few businesses were like, I would lose business out of state. So if you forbid me from using it, I'm going to lose out on that opportunity to bid out of state. So the other dynamic that we can fix here and be a part of is sending a message nationally that EMR should not be used anymore as a proxy. We could be the 4th state that officially does it, and that really does send a big message nationally to get this EMR issue kind of cleared up. So again, really appreciate it. Really also appreciate the extra layers to this, because it was at first just an EMR discussion, but now Representative Larson and Department of Workforce Services and some of our members found some other ideas that actually will bring down your EMR too, which then makes Wyoming an even better place to do business. So thank you. I would love it if you could bring back House Bill 168 again, and then add in the net deductible idea that came up since then and the buy down concept. So those would be what we would love you to move forward. And we would be gladly work with Representative Larson and LSO and other partners like AGC to try to come up with some solutions for you. So you've got a bill to look at your next committee meeting. But this is really good for business in Wyoming. And it's one of those things that doesn't sound like on its face that you get into an EMOD conversation and you're talking about bringing millions of dollars to Wyoming. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McKay. Any questions for Mr. McKay in the Business Alliance? Yes, Senator Cole.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, Rennie, just a couple questions about the EMR, and I probably, you know, I guess I didn't have to deal with it, but my people that I represent do. And it's devastating, this whole issue. So I'm glad we didn't see it. I didn't see it in the Senate, but so we got an EMR. Can we change the ratio of the EMR number? I mean, is there some way we can manipulate that to make it less relevant, but we have one? I mean, I'm asking a broad question here to deal with the EMR and how it could be represented differently, or is there no way out of whatever, like say we blew our scale up and changed the scale? You know, maybe if it goes to a 5, you go to a 10, whatever. Is there any way around the reporting of the EMR? If we have to report it, the companies have to report it. Is there any mechanism that you're aware of that we could make it less impactful to the businesses? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. McKay.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Yeah, there's been lots of conversations about that as from the business side of it because it is so complex. And I think Mr. Hansen is that person who knows the formula, and there's been conversations about tweaking formula. But really, one of the immediate thing that we've found that's the easiest step for us today are these 3 other changes. The buy down proposal, because that would mean essentially you buy down your EMR immediately. And again, you've got a 4-year-old incident and you've been safe since you've started running more safety programs. And if this buy down program would save you money and allow you to start making bids again. So that's a great solution right there. And then as Mr. Wolf was talking about the net deductible one, right now we're just chasing other states who already made that change. So that does reduce your EMR and starts to change that formula. So that would be a great fix. And then the third one, the non-chargeable one, that's good for business in Wyoming, because if you've got an incident, you now have to be the one who files the appeal to ask that it's non-chargeable. And instead, if we could pass this section again, the department could just tell you that it was non-chargeable because it's clear on its face that it was non-chargeable. And then there's another little fix that came out of this too that's even better, and that allows you to introduce, if you're the employer and you had an incident, and it happens, the department determines it is chargeable on their first review, you can still appeal, and they give you a year to bring in new evidence. So something happens where you're like, well, wait a second, I've got this evidence now that this was not our fault. And then you bring that to the department, then they can make it non-chargeable and get your EMR back down. So these are all good steps. And I think kind of factoring in something else, I think it's an interesting conversation because it is challenging, I think, for everybody who knows that EMRs are a little bit lower elsewhere, but some of that's the reality of our healthcare costs of just a rural state too. So I don't know if just a factor of reduction fixes the issue. As you can see, most folks are at 1 or below. So it's not that everyone's over this one threshold either right now in Wyoming, that we really have a common problem, but we certainly, I think, do have a challenge here with the way the Constitution's written.
Okay. Anything further for the Business Alliance? Yes, Senator Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If we somehow get some bill wrote that protects our EMRs and we're not using them for safety metrics anymore, is there any way we can keep that confidential from our state elected officials?
Mr. Chairman, yeah, I think that there's some confidentiality around it is always a great idea.
Take this over to AGC then.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Kelly Little. I'm with the Associated General Contractors of Wyoming. And from a contractor perspective, particularly a general contractor perspective, I've talked to several of our members, and many of them say that they do ask for a subcontractor's EMR during either the pre-qualification or the bidding process. Some that I talk to say that they only ask for informational purposes so that they can inquire further on what happened, and what kind of safety protocols and safety programs are in place at that company. And then some say that they do use the EMR to disqualify bidders, but advertise the threshold that is required to be met. If there is a statutory change to limit the use of EMR in contract bidding in Wyoming, our hope is there would be an accurate and valid replacement, such as the TRIR or OSHA 300, to be used in a Wyoming contractor's bidding and pre-qual process. On a nationwide level, with 3 states already passing legislation to limit the ability to request an EMR, it seems like getting ahead of the curve would be a good idea, since we've been told that the EMR is not a good indicator of safety culture. I also appreciate the 3 other considerations and tweaks that are being proposed: the EMR buy-down option, the net deductible program, and the chargeability determination changes. I think all of those would be great tweaks to the system that just make it easier for Wyoming businesses to do business in Wyoming. We look forward to working with our industry partners, Wyoming Workforce Services, Representative Larson, and this committee to continue this discussion to make the workers' comp system in Wyoming the best that it can be. And with that, I'd stand for questions.
Committee, any questions for AGC? Senator Anderson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kelly, does an out-of-state contractor, when he comes to Wyoming to do a job that maybe is time limited, does he actually sign up for workers' comp, or does he use his workers' comp from Colorado or wherever he's from?
Mr. Chairman, I would say I probably need to phone a friend.
Mr. Wolf, you just thought you were off the hot seat.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman, Senator Anderson. So it would depend, if they're coming into the state and they're bringing their employees from that state, they wouldn't be required to have our coverage. But the second they hire a Wyoming employee, they have to have our coverage.
Oh. And not just for that employee, but for all the employees that they have here.
Mr. Chairman, no, just clarified, no, just for their Wyoming employees, they would
Oh.
have to purchase a policy. They could continue to cover their people if they were coming from, Colorado or whatever, and they're paying coverage down there, we would accept their proof of coverage from that state that those people are covered in Colorado.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Excellent answer, Ms. Little. Committee, any further questions for Ms. Little? The AGC? Seeing none. Representative Larson.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Larson from Lander. At the beginning, of this whole conversation, I noted why I thought this committee had the bandwidth to do that. I think this conversation's validated that. It's really been fun. At first, you all were a little bit quiet, but then your understanding of workers' compensation and getting into the weeds really reflected your understanding. I couldn't help but reflect back on Senator Bartle listening to John Eisbart for a couple of years to help us get our head around workers' compensation stuff. Ms. Little talked about using, or hopefully being able to use the OSHA 300, which is your total recordable incidents. That's currently used by most folks, or they claim to use that. But what we have found is that they see that EMR rating over 1, and they focus on that, and they discount the OSHA 300, which is consistent across all states and which is the better metric to use. So that is in place. I think it's important also to just once again clarify this opportunity to buy down. So if your EMR is above 1, the reason it's above 1 is because of the impact an incident in the past 3 years will have on the fund and the capacity of the workers' compensation fund to pay those claims because of that. So if you go in and buy down what they calculate that extra impact would be, then that keeps you at 1 or below. An example of that might be that Representative Filer and I have a company that's doing really well, and we find out that Representative Wiley's got a company that's a competitor, and really we want to buy him out because we like his territory. And so we go through that process, but we find out that his EMR is above 1, and now it could impact our EMR, but we're not above 1. So we could get with workers' compensation, and in this new acquisition, we could buy down that old EMR to where we're at 1 or below, to where we could do bids or work in other states that we could still allow the use of that. So there's some real flexibility on that, on doing that. So, Mr. Chairman, again, thank you. It's, again, today's, the hope of today's information was to help you understand within this whole workers' compensation program, how we can help our Wyoming employers not be penalized if they're using, if companies are using their EMR as an indicator of their safety, and they're being penalized for that. And so the hope is to educate, and then hopefully we'd be allowed to perhaps put a bill together that would incorporate the things that you see on slide 14 and have that ready for the next committee meeting, and hash out any other changes, or whether the committee feels that that's an appropriate bill.
I'm hoping the committee agrees here at some point. Any questions for Representative Larson? Yes. Senator Barlow, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Chairman, let's just rip the Band-Aid off that, because sometimes when we get into workers' comp, we hear about other states and not having a state system. So under the current constitutional construct, do you think that Wyoming could have a non-state or a private solution for workers' comp? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And Mr. Chairman, and I really appreciate that call, because in the conversations that we've had on this particular issue, really reflected back from conversations we heard a couple of our industries say, well, but we got this monopolistic system in Wyoming, and if we just went and we done what other states done and had private insurers cover your workers' compensation, it would be much cheaper. It would be the right way to go. We looked at that a little bit. We had the actuarials look at it. We had industries, actuarials say, well, here's the problem with, well, let me cover this first. The problem with Wyoming is, based on the Constitution, we have to cover the what did we call, what's the term you wanted?
Extra hazardous.
Extra hazardous. Those are the ones that you have to cover. You may have another state may require every industry, doesn't matter what, but because we limit that, our pool is smaller. And so then then you couple that with high medical costs in Wyoming, boom, and you then look at the other associated costs with emergency EMS transportation, air ambulance, stuff like that. The cost of getting an injury addressed is higher in Wyoming for those various reasons. And in the conversations we had, the industry's actuary says, well, but there's some things that, you know, we see in other states, that such as being able to do this charge the net deductible. Great idea. We could do the net deductible. We do deductible now, but to one of the questions over here, I think it was Senator Anderson asked, if you choose to cover all incidents up to $10,000 and you cover them, is that still going to impact your EMR? Currently it does, but if we do the net deductible, it would not. They said, oh, that would be helpful. And then being able to buy this down. So I think at the end of the conversation, Senator Barlow, is that our industries, and Rennie could speak more on this, although there's always that conversation, the industries that we were talking with, some from up in your part of the world, kind of sit back and says, oh, maybe we didn't understand it as clearly and maybe it's not as bad. One of the other concerns is we have $3 billion in our workers' compensation fund. And the thought from some of the industry is, what on earth? We've got $3 billion, just pass that back around to industry and not have to pay any workers' compensation. Any insurance company covering hazards has to be able to pay the claims. And so you will recall over the years that we're not supposed to generate excess in our workers' compensation fund. Is supposed to be able to pay out all the claims till the last claims. When the last claim is paid, there should be zero in the account. And so it's there for a purpose, just like any other insurance company is. Now, one of the things that's kept our base rate down is because we've been able to invest those funds, those that don't have to go out, and our high return on our investments have been able to benefit the employers because we have a lower base rate. It's been reduced 15% the last 6 years. So Wyoming's done some really good things. Could we, committee and Senator Barlow, could we go to the privates? Sure, but I don't know that it's really as beneficial as some of the industry originally thought.
Just to follow up on that, couple different things. I think it's only a 3-year look back, so a 4-year is not quite right. The other thing is that, so if you are, become permanently totally disabled when you're 22 years old in an egregious accident, you could live to 80 years old. And so you have to pay permanent total disability for 60 years. So that fund covers till, every one of those types of claims. And so that's why it's the size that it is. And whenever it gets too big, then the practice in the past has been to come for either a rate reduction to employers or on occasion, you increase the value of benefits, because everyone knows that workers' comp does great for temporary total disability, but for long-term disability, it's not a huge amount of money. And also the rates they pay are in terms of the medical payouts is all statutory, but it's significantly lower than what your insurance company would pay typically, and or Medicare. So it's and that's just the ballpark we live in, and but that's my experience with it.
Okay.
Oh, one other thing, is that you can do it. There are private claims, but it has to be a comparable program. I think Walmart fits in that category, that it's privately funded, but so it's not workers' comp, but their benefits have to be comparable to ours.
Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, that privatizing this sounded like a good idea 30 years ago. Some oil companies and coal companies in Gillette decided they would just do that. They would just get that done. We got in on it because we had 600 some employees that we were pretty interested in privatizing it also. And we studied and studied for 6 months, finally invited a bunch of insurance companies to come talk to us about it. They came and talked to us about it and said they would not insure it. No way would they get in that insurance business with us. And that was 4 of the majors that major oil companies can get at the table. They would not even consider insuring us just because our pool is not the right size. All those things that we have with Wyoming, every time we try to talk insurance, we ran into that same problem with privatizing this. So I think it's a great idea, but I think the better idea is what Workers' Comp's done with bringing our rates down and addressing that. I think they've done a good job with that. At that time, they weren't doing such a good job, but now that rate decrease that you were showing in your numbers That's a big deal. Thank you.
Don't you agree?
Yeah.
Any further questions? Senator Barlow? Good? Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Any other further? Yes, Mr. McKay.
Mr. Chairman, if it's possible just to throw one more idea at the wall while you're at this. And again, one of the things that I think is so positive about this is every employer I know right now is trying to retain employees. So this is all of these changes, I think, also maintain our safety culture. And that is so important to the employers of Wyoming right now. So I think that's why this is a really good win-win. One dynamic that I just wanted to throw out there, if it was possible to explore too between meetings, is that we're trying to do a lot more work-based learning with our students right now. And one of the barriers around that can be workers' compensation. Some good work was done over about 5 or 6 years ago. 2020, a bill passed, but in that non-chargeable space, an exploration about having a student learner qualify as a non-chargeable event if there was an incident, so that way that employers aren't scared to bring in student learners and work-based learning to their. It would just be wonderful if that was something we could explore with Representative Larson and LSO between now and your next meeting.
Seeing no other public comment. Oh, there we go. And I do apologize, Representative Riggins. You have been patiently waiting here all dang day. Welcome to the Transportation Committee meeting. We'll go ahead and take you, Representative.
Thank you, Chairman Brown and Co-Chairman Pappas and members of the committee. What an important topic. So I worked 45 years in every process you can think about with hazardous gases and liquids, shipping, transportation, distribution, processing, in tanks, out of tanks, on top of tanks, and every other thing. And I worked with a lot of good contractors in this state. And I've seen this in play where you can have one bad day as a contractor and your whole company changes. And we talked briefly about the arrangements in the MSAs, and that's probably going to be part of the challenge because a lot of these companies, even the company I work for, isn't headquartered in Wyoming. So those general service agreements will usually include that type of language. So whatever we can do to try to get that EMR to stay at a reasonable rate, I'm all for it, because it's absolutely destructive to those companies. And and you got a lot of good ideas. There was a lot of good questions asked here because a lot of people here know about this subject. And we could probably talk about it for quite a while, but I think something will get done, and I appreciate the committee's work on this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Riggins. Appreciate you being here. Appreciate your input as a citizen legislator. Thank you. Anybody have any questions? Seeing none. Petroleum Association, Mr. McConaughey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ryan McConaughey with the Petroleum Association of Wyoming. Want to thank you for having this conversation. As previous speaker said, this continues to be a big issue here in Wyoming. And as Representative Riggins just said, many of the companies that operate in the oil and gas industry in Wyoming are based outside or headquartered outside the state of Wyoming. And so that dynamic between Wyoming employees and Wyoming contractors trying to get contracts with some of the companies that do business in Wyoming is certainly going to be a challenge. When I first heard about this topic from Representative Larson, our concern kind of started to talk about, well, what does that look like for buying down your EMR? Does that give a company, kind of the authority to be a bad actor and then just pay the money to get that EMR down? I'm confident that there are side rails in place to make sure that a company has the proper safety policies in place and will continue to move forward in a responsible manner. I also wanted to touch on something that Representative Larson said in regards to the potential of acquisition of another company. Mergers and acquisitions continue to play a big role in the oil and gas industry today. And so being able to possibly correct the record of a company that you acquire or another company acquires would certainly be beneficial in our industry. As you all know, if any of you have been on a rig recently, safety is a top priority for our industry. And so we make sure that it's part of the culture day in and day out. But as was previously stated, one bad day can really impact your EMR. And we're proud in the oil and gas industry that our safety record is strong. If you look at some of the government research, most on a day-to-day basis, it's actually safer to work in the oil and gas industry than it is to work in government. But when that, changes,
Or.
yeah, definitely the legislature. But where that changes is when we do have an incident, it's catastrophic. And we are aware of that. And so we certainly encourage the committee to move forward and continue discussing this and hopefully bring a bill forward. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for PAW? Representative Nicholas.
So I just want to know if Ryan wanted to date my daughter in high school because they graduated from Riverton together at the same time.
I did not.
Very awkward question.
It ages me a little bit though.
Any further questions? Seeing none. Thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate it, Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Hamilton?
Uh, Ms.
We're not Hamilton anymore, are we? My apologies, Eve.
Mr. Chairman, we do have one person online for public comment. Megan Harrington is
perfect.
available.
If you can please let her in.
She should be online now.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Megan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I work for a steel erection company based out of Cheyenne, and this is one of the issues that has actually caused us to lose work is because GCs have requested this. And we had one incident back in 2021 that just finally dropped off for my 2026 EMR. So it's finally not something I have to constantly explain. But even with the letters from Workers' Comp and working with Workers' Comp on all of their programs, showing our safety policies, our safety programs, we are with AISC, which is the American Institute of Steel Construction. And to be certified with them, you have to go through a very extensive process. It's a very intense safety process. And we've won multiple safety awards with them, along with the Steel Erectors Association of America. And none of that has been able to counter the EMR rate when it went above the 1 because of the one incident. Because we are a smaller company, so one incident kind of affects us a little bit more drastically, especially being steel industry. It's much more drastic with one injury, but so being able to revamp this where it's not the EMR rate that they're looking at, and instead they're actually taking into account our safety culture and everything else instead would be incredibly helpful as a Wyoming company to be able to work and thrive in Wyoming.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Harrington. Appreciate that. Any questions for Ms. Harrington? Steel constructors. I think what's interesting about this is we have seen such a diversity of people that this impacts, talking about everybody from the clerical office workers to steel constructors to hazardous chemicals, extra hazardous dirt workers. So across the board, I think we see that there's an opportunity here. And so I guess I would ask the committee if there's any directives for staff at this point. Senator Anderson. Thank you.
Yes, I think Lloyd ought to bring a bill to this next meeting.
Well, I feel like if you wanted that to happen, you should make a motion.
I was so moved that Representative Larson bring a bill for this next meeting.
There is a
that we
motion
can
made.
massacre it.
And seconded by Nicholas to have do we want to use the exact same bill and then we just work that? Does that be the recommendation?
I don't care which one.
168. Representative Larson.
we'll construct a bill.
Okay. Construct a bill and then I'll just have you work through, once we have language, send it to the chairman. Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed, no. Excellent. That passes. So I believe we will have upwards of 3 bills for consideration for our next meeting to at least work through and work those through. So that meeting, for those of you anywhere on the west side of the state, luckily will be in Evanston. Anybody else, unfortunately, is all the way over in Evanston. So we will see you all over in Evanston. With that, do we have anything further for this evening? We do. Oh, yeah. I'm just saying that we're going to be seeing. Yeah, no, we definitely have a meeting tomorrow. All right. With that, we are adjourned for YDOT and yeah, that is something that I will say. We did receive some communication from the military department. Not sure that they're going to be able to get out of Cheyenne tomorrow. So be prepared that we may have a virtual meeting with them. So yeah. We're being here. We would like you to fly up here in a helicopter. That was
Fly us home.
and fly us home, please. With that, we are adjourned and we will be back in here tomorrow at 8:30.